Welcome, Sega fans, to the Sega Guys podcast, the show passing the checkpoint every Monday. I'm Dan the Mega Driver, and join me this week, the Kawasaki to my Honda NSR 500. It's Tom Charnock of the Dreamcast Junkyard. Tom, how are you doing, mate? It's great to have you back on the show.
I'm doing excellently. Thank you, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on the pod again. I'm not going to lie, I can't really fill the massive size 11 boots of your, compadre, James, the Segaholic. I'm not even going to attempt to, and I'm not going to try and do a Scottish accent either. I think we'll just cancel the entire show if that's the case. But no, it's great to be here, and obviously talking about a topic very close to my heart. Before we start, though, I've got something I want to show you. I thought I'd do the episode wearing this, if that's okay. So let's get to it.
I love it, mate. Love it.
And for the benefit of those listening to the audio podcast, I just put my motorcycle helmet on. Bit of visual comedy there for you, just like a little preview of what's to come. But that's enough from me.
Before we get into the topic, though, mate, how are you doing? It's been a while. The last time we had you on was when we had you and Saturn Dave on, wasn't it? I think it was the last time, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, I've been very well, thank you. In the intervening time since I was last on, I have been gifted a gigantic folder of Sega Saturn games. It has literally every Sega Saturn game in it. They're not originals; they're all copies.
Yeah.
Because of that, because my Sega Saturn still has its working disc drive in it, I've just been going through some of the games that I didn't really play back in the day, and also just revisiting some classics as well. So I think one of the first games I put on was Andretti Racing.
Yeah.
And it probably not as good as I remember it. In my mind, it has photorealistic visuals, not the pixelated mess that it actually is, but still every bit as fun with that really lengthy career mode as I remember. So yeah, I've been getting back into this as well as pretty much everything else that I own. So yeah,
we've been using what are they called? You've been using an action replay, one of the modified action replays to play. I can't remember what they're called now. The name's escaping me. There's a name for it.
It's just out of iShop. I can see the box, but I can't remember what it's called. It's just the cartridge that you plug in the back of it, and it just lets you play like rips and import games and all the rest of it. So
it's going to drive me absolutely insane now. I've got the name of it on the tip of my tongue, but I keep thinking Satiate Fenrir, but they're ODEs. But I know exactly what it is.
I'm not that classy, mate. I'm not that classy. It's just a basic, generic thing that you plug in the cartridge slot at the back. So
awesome.
Yeah, no bells and whistles.
Cool. And I can see you've got a nice little few games on the shelf there. And a few of them we'll be getting into. But before we get into today's topic, which people would no doubt have guessed from your lovely bike helmet that you brought on just now, and obviously the title of the podcast, but the Jaguar case.
Got
your boots as well.
As well so.
And Tom has brought. He's literally got his boots on. For those that can't see, so you've got this Doom copy that you've got behind there. Caught my eye. That looks absolutely fantastic. Love the case that's in.
Yeah, that's just a cheap kind of one of those 3D picture cases you can get, from like Wilkinson's or one of them other cheap shops. And basically the reason I've got it in that case is because when I met John Romero a few years ago, I sort of thrust this Jaguar copy of Doom at him and got him to sign it, which he did. And a very nice man. I even got to touch his hair. And
amazing.
Yeah, we had a really good chat about, just Doom and games in general, really. And he signed my copy of Doom, so I just thought I'd put it into a case and have it there as an homage, And I was on strict instructions from James to just not mention the Jaguar, but here we are, merely a few minutes in, and we're already talking about the 64-bit beast. Sorry, James.
Oh, but it could be worse, mate. You could have a Sega Saturn copy of Doom up there, which we definitely don't want to touch on. I'd much rather see the Jaguar one here. Absolutely, mate.
It's quite appropriate on the. It's quite appropriate on the cover of Doom for the Saturn. The skull is like engulfed in flames because that's the best place for it, isn't it? On a fire.
Yeah, just burn it. Do you know what? I went well out of my way to get a copy of that a few years back because I kept thinking to myself, I've seen the videos and it can't be that bad. And oh my God, it is. I'd prefer to play the 32X version, but obviously the Jag version's just legendary, superb version of the game. I was playing it link play with my son at Gaming Expo. I forget which one it was, but I had two Jags linked up together.
Nice.
playing
Yeah,
deathmatch on
juggling.
them, and I thought it was amazing. My son, he's thinking, well, it's not like Fortnite or Call of Duty, so less impressed, but still amazing,
Yeah,
amazing stuff. So today's
indeed.
topic
Yeah.
then, mate, one that's very close to your heart, and yeah, when we were thinking about topics, I was thinking, well, Tom loves his bikes. Broached the idea to you, and you was like, "Oh, I was thinking of the idea," and I wasn't sure if you'd go
Yeah.
for it. But I've been really excited about this one. But this is Sega on two wheels. We called it the best Sega games on motorbikes, although I think we're probably going to touch on every single Sega related bicycle game, I think, or or motorbike game. These when we're talking two wheels, we're talking motorcycles rather than push bikes. So no BMX games in here, but all motorcycles. But there's quite a lot in here, isn't there? And thanks for putting the list together.
No, no. I mean, this has been a bit of a learning experience for me as well, because obviously everybody knows the more popular games. And I should caveat this, or we should caveat this as well at the start, that it's not specifically games created by Sega. Obviously, all the arcade ones we'll talk about are Sega classics, but a lot of these games were developed by other companies as well, through Sega platforms. So that's kind of the minor caveat that we're going for here. But yeah, actually a pretty big list. So this has a potential to be quite a lengthy chat, but we'll do our best to give our opinions on all of them. So yeah.
Yeah, we'll rattle through them. And yeah, before we jump into that though, just very quickly, mate, because you are obviously an avid motorcyclist. So you own a motorbike. How long have you been riding now, and how long did you get into it? How did you get into it?
I I started riding a bike back in about 1999-ish, maybe something like that, maybe a little bit before. I started on a scooter. I needed
Hmm.
to get a scooter. And in the UK, you do a thing called a CBT. It used to
Yeah.
be like 25 quid. You rock up at a school playground, you go around some cones on a scooter, and then you're allowed to go out on the road on your own.
Yep.
That was much simpler times back then. And then I upgraded from that to a 125 motorcycle. And it was just really to commute, get to work, go to college on. And I've been riding ever since then. And ever since, really, I had a bit of a gap. When I joined the Navy, I didn't have a bike then. But then when I left, I got back into biking again. And I've just gone through a succession of bigger and faster bikes. I own two at the moment: a Royal Enfield Interceptor 650, which might mean something to people watching this or listening to this, and my other one is a BMW F800 ST. And I've owned many bikes. Some of the games that we're going to talk about today have actually featured bikes that I've owned. So things like the ZZR 1100, I believe, is featured in at least one of these games. I know that the Yamaha Phaser 600 is in one of them as well. So I won't get too geekish about the different bikes that I've owned, but yeah, I love it. It's my main mode of transport, and I go riding for pleasure. I commute. I'm forever tinkering with engines, as James will attest to when I've sent him pictures of me on the drive out with a set of carburetors in bits, pulling my hair out. It's a little bit like owning a Dreamcast sometimes when you own an
I
older
was
bike,
just
because you're
thinking
constantly
that.
having to take it apart and clean things. So being a Dreamcast owner and a Dreamcast fan has kind of put me in good stead for owning really dodgy old motorbikes. So yeah, that's just a little bit of my background on two wheels. I've never even asked you this, and I think I'm probably sure you're going to tell me no, but you don't ride, do you?
No, I'm terrified.
Okay,
I
fair enough.
had a load of mates that did go through. They had scooters and then pretty much went through similar. No, they got the scooters when they were 16, went through the CVT, and then they got bigger and faster bikes. But a lot of them didn't ride anymore after that. They got cars and kind of moved, didn't go back to bikes after that for whatever reason. A couple of them did, but yeah, me, I think the closest I got was someone found a scrambler over a field that we used to play on. And obviously I think we're all about 14, 15, and we're all taking turns on it. And I got on it, twisted the handle, went up in the air, landed on my back, and never went on one since. No. It's just one
Yeah,
of those
I
things.
think the correct term for someone like you, Dan, is sensible. Yeah, sensible.
Yeah, I'm good on a push bike. It's my main transport to work is a push bike. Nowhere near as exciting, but yeah, I love motorbike games, but I'm terrified of getting on the real thing.
Best way to be, I think. At least you're not going to, end up like what do they call it, a meat crayon on playing on a Mega Drive or a Saturn. So
I tell you what, mate, if I'm playing any footage while this is playing, people saw how I ride a bike in games, will probably think, yeah, it's a good thing that he's not on the roads, to be honest. So we'll go through these, and there is quite a lot to go through. But you quite helpfully segmented these into kind of consoles, and I thought the way we'll do it is we'll go through each console generation. We'll start with the Master System or SG-1000 in one instance, go through all the way up to the Dreamcast. And during that time, we'll talk about the games that are ports of arcade games. We'll touch on the arcade games when we're talking about the ports. And then we'll go, lastly, we'll touch on the arcade exclusive ones that never came home, which Sega made. But yeah, they're not all made by Sega. These are all games that appeared either on Sega hardware or that Sega created themselves. I think the Mega Drive legal disclaimer that pops up, produced by or under license from Sega, is probably the inapt description for all of these. So we'll crack on. We'll crack on, mate. And the first place to start is where else but Hang On. And I think we'll probably talk about the arcade game first of all, and then the two ports that came out of that. But obviously, Yu Suzuki's first, I think it was like his second ever game. It's such a massive, iconic, and like a quantum leap in terms of technology. This super scalar game with an actual motorbike that you sat on, or a frame that you sit on and ride side to side. And brought a new wave of kind of 3D scaling content to the masses. Did you first play? When did you first play Hang On, mate? Did you play it in the arcades or did you play one of the ports?
I played one of the ports, and I'm probably going to jump forward a little bit here, but it was the Mega Drive port was my first experience, or Super Hang On, not the original. But obviously, for the purposes of this podcast, the video, I did go back and play the originals, and like you say, I think back then seeing something like Hang On was just a kind of game changer, wasn't it? It was just so smooth and just a whole new way of technology. To have something like Hang On actually existing was kind of cutting edge, wasn't it? So and like you say, with the gameplay mechanic of actually sitting on a bike was completely new at the time. I think I read somewhere doing some research for this that Yu Suzuki actually was he did ride a bike to actually get the feel for the way the bike should handle, and the actual cabinet with the full size sort of chassis on it. So just pushing boundaries. It was fantastic.
Apparently, he studied loads of Freddie Spencer videos when he was creating Hang On. Is the tale on this one? But yeah, it was like a quantum leap, as I say, in terms of video game technology, and a massive. I think it was the #1 best-selling arcade game for at least a year all over the world, and carried on. I think in Japan it was still in like the top 5 or something for the next couple of years. So it was a massive financial success. It's amazing that there was actually ports to Sega home hardware that same year in 1985. So first it came to, it's funny the order it comes in. It first came to the Master System as a launch title in Japan, not the Master System at the time, obviously the Sega Mark III. And then slightly later it came to the Sega SG-1000, their first console. It's called Hang On 2, but it just literally is the original game, or the Master System Mark III port, whatever you want to call it, but stripped down so that it can run on the weaker hardware. The Master System version, I think, is actually brilliant. The scrolling in that and the way the track moves, I think it's really smooth. The SG-1000 a bit choppier, but still pretty cool. Have you played either of those ports at all?
Yeah, only, as I say, only in the build up to this conversation, and via emulation, because I don't have any of the original hardware. But it's very interesting to see the sort of the downgrade from the arcade to the home ports, and obviously because the home systems were so much inferior, so much more inferior than the arcade hardware. It kind of, in this modern era of consoles being the pinnacle, and PC gaming being so good, that you kind of forget that people would go to the arcades for the all bells, all singing, all dancing experience, and then just have something that was vaguely similar in the home. Kind of, it wasn't the same, but it kind of looked the same. It was like a facsimile of what you could get in the arcades. And two ports are they're functional. They're perfectly serviceable. I imagine back in the, I mean, I was 3 when these games came out. So if you'd been in the arcade and seen Hang On, the arcade cabinet, and then gone home and played the Master System or the SG-1000 version, it might have been a little bit underwhelming, but still it's practically the same thing, isn't it? It's the same. It's just a cut down version of what you would have seen in the arcade. So
it was kind of par for the course then, wasn't it? Yeah, it's because we both come from the era of kind of 8-bit home micros, don't we? So we were kind of used to seeing games that were cut down. There was a few. I've got like Chase HQ on the Commodore 64 was one of my earliest games, and arcade ports to the Commodore 64 were massively cut down, but I still still kind of squint and think that I was pretending to play the arcade machine. Obviously, they were a million miles away. The worst thing is, I think we probably both talked about this in the podcast. I think it's the first time we had you in the show. We were talking about your journey through gaming, and we were talking about you had the 464, didn't you? And
Yes, the Amstrad 464, yeah.
Yeah, and you get the game cases, and it would have all the screenshots in the back, and they'd all be from various formats. You'd have like the Amiga and the Atari ST ones first that look in still images look just like the arcade, and then you get it home and you put it in. It's like, well, that's not my one. I think both of those are not too bad as far as ports are concerned. I do like the Master System version of Hang On. As I say, the way the track moves is really fluid. I like how they did that. But you put the two side by side, and you can tell there's a massive gulf in hardware there, which is I suppose to be expected. Cool.
Absolutely.
Next one on the 8-bit world is Enduro Racer. Now this is two massively different games. Did you play either of these before the podcast, or were these kind of newish to you?
Yeah, again, these were quite new to me. Just doing research for this, and I think I know what you're going to say about the differences between the two games, because they're not really, they don't look similar in any way, do they?
They're completely different.
yeah. So so the arcade cabinet is quite similar to Hang On, isn't it? It's in this very, very much similar mold. It's an into the screen arcade racer, obviously, but as opposed to being, based on road bikes, superbikes, it's more like dirt bikes, as the name suggests, Enduro Racer. And the major mechanic is, doing jumps and flying over rocks and things and trying not to hit, roadside objects and explode into a ball of flame. Whereas the port for the Master System, which came out in 1987, is completely different, and it's more of a sort of it reminds me of a viewpoint. The angle is like a viewpoint style, isn't it? It's kind of shifted onto a sort of, is it 45-degree angle, and you're kind of going up the screen. And there's the differences in the arcade game in the home port is that in the home port you've got added things to avoid. So there's trucks and things that you have to not hit and that kind of stuff.
There's hazards, aren't there? I mean, the cars that go along, they look like 1930s gangster cars for the most part. I think Dick Tracy's going to jump out at them and start firing a Tommy gun at you or something, or one of his rogues gallery. They're strangely different. I think it's probably a good thing that they didn't try to replicate the arcade on the Master System, because as with all the jumps and everything, obviously Hang On is really flat, whereas Enduro Racer in the arcade, as you say, you're going over the jumps and there's a lot of elevation and declines and everything like that. So I think that would have been really challenging to replicate on the Master System. Did you? I remember when I first played it on an emulator. Did you clock on how to lift your wheels up and everything like that? Because that completely passed me by. Because I first played it and I was like crashing every single time. So at least you found it.
Thing was, when you first discovered the mechanic of pulling up on the handlebars to go over the jumps in the arcade version, the amount of height that you get is just comical at times, because you fly so high and so far. And the best bit is you can actually move the bike in midair. You know what I mean? It's not just like you're on a trajectory. You're going towards the other track, you can pull it back again and save it. So that was quite fun. It'd be good if you could do that in real life on a motorbike. But it's weird, it's because the same mechanic it translates into the Master System game, where you have to pull back on the D-pad to get more air as you go over the jumps. It kind of reminded me a little bit of what was the game? Was it on the? It's a Konami game. Konami, was it? Oh, it's going to escape me now. But we had it on the Game Boy. And it was quite similar, where you do jumps and fly. I don't think it was Excitebike. It was something else. I think it was made by Konami. But you pull back on the thing as you went over jumps, and you get more air and go further.
I haven't played that one.
Yeah,
I'll have to stick it out after.
Yeah, I might be completely making that up. It might just be an amalgamation of different memories in my brain over 30 odd years of playing games. But it was. It's quite intuitive, and I don't know why I just automatically, instinctively think, you need to pull back as you go over a jump, because that makes you go higher. Yeah, that's what you do in your life, allegedly.
Maybe it was inspired by the Enduro Racer. Quite possibly, all these games borrow off each other. I mean, Hang On, Yu Suzuki just said that he wanted to beat Namco's racer at the pole position at the time. So
Mm.
they all just borrow and inspired by each other. So quite possibly he borrowed the same mechanic. So stood you in good stead there. You've remembered to pull back, whereas I didn't have that experience. First time I was playing you can get by on the Master System one, but the arcade one I was literally crashing and having no idea what was going
Yeah.
on until I
Because you've got them
had to
rocks,
look
haven't
it
you? You've
up.
got all them like boulders. You've got all them
Yeah,
boulders that come after every jump. So if you don't, you just either land in between them and have to like negotiate them, or that's it, smash into it and crash and burn.
there you go. That's just me once again demonstrating why I'm not on a motorbike one. Out of the two, this is always a good question. Which one did you prefer, the 3D one or the isometric one?
I think the original, the arcade version, it's just really smooth, and it's essentially hang on but with jumps.
Yeah,
So yeah, I was actually surprised at how nicely it moved, to be honest. I know I was playing it on an emulator, so it's not true one-to-one recreation, but if the arcade version plays as well as that, then I'd probably say Enduro Racer, just because it's got a little bit more variety. What
yeah,
about yourself?
yeah. For me, I think I'm more familiar and I've got more of an affection for the Master System one. So I've always leaned towards that one. But the more I got used to the arcade one, the more I started enjoying it. I'd imagine if you actually had the handlebars that you're pulling up and pulling the throttle in and everything, and that just takes it up to another level. It's a shame I've never actually seen one in the wild. Probably the thing with
Me
those sort
neither.
of things is, yeah, probably the thing with those sort of games is you imagine that they've just been thrashed about by absolute lunatics. They've probably just yanked them off the frame and stuff like that, and they barely work anymore. They've
Mm,
probably sadly been taken to that big arcade in the sky. I've never seen one in
yeah.
arcade club either. Oh, brilliant. So we're rounding out the last of the 8-bit games, or the 8-bit era here. We'll touch on some 8-bit games later on. The last one we've got on here is one that I hadn't played an awful lot of, which is GP Rider. And was this one new to you as well?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, mate, most of the arcade ones and the pre-16-bit era ones are
Hmm.
pretty much all new to me, because I never
Yeah.
really got involved in that period. I mean, I had the Amstrad at that time, so
Hmm.
this was all kind of alien to me. It was only when the 16-bit came along that I kind of got involved a little bit more.
Hmm.
But yeah, GP Rider on the Master System is is a pretty good port, I think, of the arcade. It's completely different visually, and we'll talk about the actual arcade version, I think, in a little bit later on. But
Yeah.
as far as arcade home ports go, it I think it's a pretty decent crack at what the arcade game was. You can see the visual style is kind of tried to be replicated in the way that the sprites of the bikes have got really large back wheels, to give that kind of illusion of perspective on the bike,
Yeah.
and also the way that it's got a kind of a split screen mode, even though you're only playing it in single player, because obviously the arcade cabinet is the majority of them are two-player
Yeah.
cabinets, so it's kind of mimicking that, I believe. So yeah, it's an interesting game, and it can be a little bit distracting having the CPU adversary on the top screen. So for people who haven't seen this game, are you going to put some video up on the
I
screen
think I'm
now,
going to try
or
and put some footage in this one, yeah.
yeah,
So hopefully there's some footage playing right now just to demonstrate the Master System version. So you do have
yeah,
the twos, and it's not that uncommon for the Master System. There was a couple of other games that did it. So I've got, I think both of no, just the first Super Monaco GP for the Master System did it as well. So you've always got
okay,
the other car, and the CPU car is always at the top. I've never played it
yes,
in two-player mode. I don't know if that's going to be reversed, whereas usually if you're player one, you're playing at the top and the rivals at the bottom.
yeah,
So
that's a good point. That yeah,
it takes a while it took me a while to get my head around it. And you're trying to play at the bottom, you've got this CPU rinsing everyone else up.
yeah.
Passing, yeah. But yeah, it was
And
the master. Yeah, go on.
sorry, no, I keep cutting you off.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry,
So
apologies.
no, it's fine. Yeah, I was going to say the Master System version I thought was pretty good, but I did, as far as the ports are concerned, I actually preferred the Game Gear version. I felt
Yeah,
like that had probably a little bit more to it, as a little bit more, even more authentic, because I think the Master System game was coded by Tiertex, who are a little bit infamous among the especially around the home computing world, put out a few questionable games, whereas the Game Gear version is apparently by Sega internally, which is single screen. So you've got a larger play view, more colors, and I think it's got a little bit more of the animation from the arcade game I found in the Game Gear version. Did you get a chance to play
am
both?
I didn't play the Game Gear version, but I'm sure I read somewhere that the Game Gear version of GP Rider is basically Hang On with it's like a reskin of Hang On for the Game Gear. I don't know if I'm making that up, but I'm sure I read that somewhere, possibly Wikipedia. So how true it is, I don't know. But the some of the standout things for me about the Master System version are it has some quite nice digitized speech
Mhm.
before the races, and I like the way that you can kind of tinker with the sort of setup of the bikes, and also it's got like a fairly strange little mechanic where when you run out of time, it doesn't say you've run out of time; it says you've run out of fuel.
Yeah.
So that it kind of threw me a little bit because I was thinking I could see this thing going down in the corner of this thing. I'm thinking, is that why? So there's on either side of the screen, you've got your timer in the right hand side and you've got the CPU's timer in the left. But the CPU's timer is always at 99 and yours counts down.
Mm.
And I was thinking to myself, why has the CPU got full fuel that's not going down and my fuel is going down? And it took me a couple of goes before it dawned on me that that's actually a timer. It's not fuel. And when I was getting game over, it's because I'd run out of time, not fuel. Because I was thinking, am I doing something wrong with the gear ratios? Am I pressing like the turbo button without realizing it? But then I was like, it's a timer, and it's just trying to make it more like realistic. You've run out of fuel,
Yeah.
not you've run out of time. So that was a little bit bewildering, yeah, when I first started playing it. But yeah, uh, yeah, I just think it's a great port. It's really smooth, and you can actually get around the courses quite easily just by preempting the corners, because obviously you get the arrows popping up as you get towards
Mm.
the corner. If you just move over to that side of the track, you'll just go around it at full speed. You know, it gets quite easy after a while once you learn the mechanic. So yeah,
Yeah, I think both ports were pretty decent. I slightly preferred the Game Gear one, and I could swear I was going around the track. To be honest, I only just started playing these ones, just like you, just before the podcast. So it might be that my memories all over the last few days are all churning into one. Um, but I enjoyed them. I did really enjoy the arcade version as well. That was one that I hadn't
mate,
played an awful lot before. Brutally hard, but
that is it's stunning, and it's absolutely
yeah.
stunning. And we'll get onto that in a bit when we talk about the arcade games. But yeah, mate, it's been a while since I've been blown away. I'm a big stickler for that kind of late 80s, early 90s, big chunky sprites, big Monaco Grand Prix style,
Yeah.
world flashing by in big chunks. GP Rider and another game we'll talk about in a bit,
Yeah.
Sega Racing Hero, absolutely top class examples of those, but I'll zip it for now. Before we get to
We'll come
it.
back to GP Rider a bit later on. Things are getting juicy now, mate, because we're now moving out of the 8-bit era into the 16-bit era. And top of the list, one of my personal favorites, Super Hang On. One of the first games that I played on the Mega Drive via the classic old Mega Games 3-in-1 cart. How did you first play this
That's
one?
it. Mate, same
Exactly the
thing.
same.
Got a Mega Drive for Christmas. It would have been probably 1994, maybe 93, around that period. And it came on Mega Games cartridge. It had
Yeah.
Super Hang On it, columns, and something else. What was the other game? I
World
can't
Cup
remember.
Italia 90.
That's it. Welcome to 90, yeah. And yeah, Super Hang On. Yeah, that was my first introduction to it. Amazing, amazing music, cool gameplay, just a whole new experience after jumping off of an Amstrad CPC 464 onto that. It was just like, ooh, this is a bit of a game changer, isn't it? Yeah, I think, to be honest, I think most people who are like our age group, probably when they were introduced to the Mega Drive, at some point will have played Super Hang On just because of how kind of ubiquitous it was in that
Yeah.
era. Yeah.
It was on Mega Games 1, and then it was on like Mega Games, at least two versions of the Mega Games 6-pack. I did a video for the channel where I was talking about Mega Games 1, and it was basically just like a rite of passage, wasn't it? I mean, everyone at some point had played Mega Games 1 or one of the Mega Games that had
Mm.
like one of the later ones. And at the time, I think I loved World Cup Italia 90 more, which sounds completely insane now. But you go back, and Columns is cool. Italia 90 is. I've got a nostalgia for it, but I know it's not great. But Super Hang
Yeah.
On is just.
Goal!
Yeah. So... you talk about clear speech, and that's not one of them. It's one.
The speech in GP Ride on the Mass System's better than the speech in World Cup Italia 90, to be
It
honest.
is, yeah.
Um,
But Super Hang On's just absolutely stunning. And it's not too far removed. We'll touch on it. Might as well talk about the arcade game now because the port is so close to the arcade. If you put the two side by side, aside from the smoothness of the scaling, maybe if you count the
mm,
number of bikes on the screen and a few color differences, the Mega Drive version got really close, which is stunning for the time. Did you play the arcade game at all, or did you? Um,
I do have, I seem to have recollections of like, when you were a kid and you'd go somewhere like to a seaside resort and not really know where you were going, maybe, I don't know, Blackpool or Morecambe or somewhere like that, and you'd
yeah,
see a thing and it'd be like, oh, this is cool. And maybe sit on it and move, but not actually be allowed to play on it.
yeah,
I have memories of that, seeing the bikes and things. But I think, yeah, my first real exposure to it would have been the Mega Drive.
yeah,
And it's actually quite embarrassing to admit this, but it was only quite later, a lot later, from having the actual original Mega Drive version that we got for Christmas that year, that I realised that there was a turbo boost button in Super Hang-On. I didn't know until relatively recently. To be honest, quite embarrassing that, isn't it?
yeah.
Um,
I still forget. I
yeah,
still
it's easy to
forget. If
forget.
if I leave it for ages, I'm not. I'm like. I'm sure there's something that helps you because I met as a kid. I was like, this game's impossible. I'll stick to career. And that's the other thing. You got the career mode in it, which aside from the obnoxiously complex and long passwords, the career mode was pretty in depth for the time. You go in and you can
Yeah,
choose your bike upgrades and everything. And I thought I'd stick to that because you can't really use your turbo in that much. And I was thinking, even doing Africa on the like it's just the easiest one is impossible.
yeah, yeah.
And then it was years later, I was like, oh.
Ah, hmm. Interesting. Wonder why it did. I wonder why it was called Super Hang On. Yeah. I mean, it's funny you mentioned the sort of how faithful it is to the arcade original. One of the things that sticks with me all these years later about having played the arcade game subsequently, and also the Mega Drive one, is the subtle differences, and they're mainly down to I suppose maybe the hardware limitations of the Mega Drive, I imagine. But things like, which really struck me as odd, is the bikes. The bikes are all different colours, the ones that you race against, and the tail lights are all the corresponding colour. So the green bike has a green tail light, the yellow bike has a yellow tail light. Do you know what I mean? And I always thought that was really odd, and I just thought to myself,
Yeah,
why has it got a green tail light? But it must have been something to do with like maybe the sprite coding or something, or who knows?
yeah.
But it just stuck with me for some reason.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of these things where each sprite has. It's like the SG-1000 has a limitation where it could only have two colors per sprite. And imagine it was something similar on the Mega Drive, but obviously because this at the start there's what, six bikes on the screen, so it's probably like, oh, I've got to figure out some way to make this as efficient
Yeah, yeah, totally.
as possible. But yeah, do you know what? I never noticed that myself.
It's one of them things you won't be able to
To
unsee it
see them
now.
all zoom off, but
Yeah,
I'm gonna spot it now.
yeah. No,
So thanks for
one
that.
last thing about Super Hang-On is we need to mention is the music. I think the music is iconic as like the outrun music. It's so good. When you hear it, even if you've not played the game for years, it all comes flooding back, doesn't it? The music select screen, you're just like, oh man, these tunes are so good. Sega were just killing it, weren't they?
Mate, we are on exactly they were. We were on exactly the same page then because I was going to say before
Yeah.
we move on, we need to talk about the music. Yeah, they're all absolutely fantastic tracks, and it's yeah, the title track is iconic. That gets you pumped up there, boom, 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 boom. But then like you got and yeah, for me, it's a soundtrack as iconic as
Oh yeah.
Outruns. They're all phenomenal tracks, and the fact that you get to choose your track at the beginning just is the icing on the cake. So obviously, I'm going to have to ask you, which one are you? Which of the
Right.
four tracks
I'm
do you
gonna
choose?
look like a bit of a noob here now. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the third one. Is it Outrider Christ? Winning Run? Yeah,
Winning
yeah,
Run.
that's it. Yeah,
Mm,
yeah, definitely the third
yeah,
one.
that used to be my that used to be my choice. That was the one I'd always put on, but I've become more of an Outrider Crisis fan. It's
You've changed.
I
You've
think
changed.
I went for a phase where I was just like, yeah, I've changed, man. I was going for a phase, when you go through. Obviously, I think it was when like you discover YouTube and you find that there's game soundtracks on there, and I started listening to kind of arranged versions of the soundtrack, and I just fell in love with the arranged version of that. And obviously, that's not what you get the Mega Drive version, but it just made me appreciate the song that a little bit more. But Winning Run is superb as well. I mean, they're all brilliant, like Sprinter and I can't remember the last one, but
Yeah,
they're all brilliant. I don't think you can go wrong. Bit like Outrun, as you say.
yeah, totally.
Good stuff, mate. So we're going to be talking about a bunch of games now. um, Road Rash. So the first one in 1991, Road Rash 2 in 92. The third one came in 95. We had a Mega CD port in 94 and a Master System port in 92, I think. Which one of these did you first play?
First one I played was the original on the Mega Drive, the original Road Rash. And I have to say, I think this game has got a lot to answer for when it comes to my kind of ensuing desire to ride a motorbike. It was because it felt so open, the game, because the way the game plays with these undulating landscapes and these wide open plains of Napa Valley and Sierra Nevada and all these places that seem like a million miles away, and they actually are. It just looked so free, and it felt like you were riding into, again, like I say, into the wilderness. And it was that feeling that just, it felt so romantic to me, not so much the, riding along and beating up other riders and all the rest of it. It was basically the
I was gonna say, you're not grabbing chains.
No,
and
I've put that behind me now. I went through that phase, but I've outgrown that now. No, it was just a feeling of being out in the wide open spaces of these massive, like, open plains, and it was that kind of really appealed to me, I suppose. So yeah, it just opened the whole world of riding a bike to me, and on top of that, it just plays really, really well, doesn't it? Even to this day. I mean, I still play the originals 1, 2, and 3 on my PSP because I've got the EA Replay versions on the PSP.
Yeah, the trilogy, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's worth mentioning, friend of the podcast, John Miniman, did an amazing DF retro about Road Rash, where he goes in depth through the whole series, and it's one of the best videos I've ever seen. And he just goes on deep dives about, first one, second one, third one, the ports. Such a great video, but there's not really much more I can say about these games that he hasn't already said in his video. But just a great game. I mean, what about yourself? Where did your love affair with the series start?
Yeah, so I love what you just said though. Just like you get out into these single carriageway roads that are like in the great American expanse, like lush greenery, and there really is something about that. Obviously, that changes in later ones, and we'll get onto one of the later ones in a bit. But when it's more city space, but yeah, there's something about those initial ones where you're kind of in the wilderness that's really special. I did like the first one, which has got a 2-player mode, but you alternate on there. And I remember playing it. One of my friends, school friends at the time, he had an uncle that also had a Mega Drive, and he'd lend him games, and Road Rash was one of them. And we were playing it, and obviously we're taking turns, just like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if you could both play at the same time? And then obviously Road Rash 2 games, it's perfect. We can both play at the same time. I'm pretty rubbish at them. I think you have to, because they're quite long games, aren't they? The courses are like 4 or 5 minutes at a time, aren't they? And you're looking at your mile counter going up. But yeah, we used to do the cheats and stuff in the second one. Did you use the cheat to get the wild thing motorbike in Road Rash 2?
I didn't. Well, I may have done, but it's so long ago. This was during the time when I actually had the Mega Drive, the original time when we first had it. Me and my brother shared one, and we get the magazines and things, and you get the cheats in the magazines and things. So we must have done it, but I think there was just more of a, because the bikes in the shop were so expensive. It was kind of like, I want to play it and get and achieve something to get the bike. There was like the mythical one, like the Diablo 1000. Obviously, they're all made up bikes because they didn't have a license. But you'd see this bike, I want to get the Diablo 1000 because it just looks so big and chunky, and it's called Diablo. It's like the devil. Well, yeah, we must have used cheats, but I can't remember doing. So no.
It was. I can't remember if you could actually unlock it. It wasn't in, because obviously as you go into the shop, you can scroll along and you go through all the bikes in turn. I don't think it was actually on there. So either it was hidden and you had to go through sort of stuff to unlock it. But the only way I ever played it was through the cheat code and stuff. The thing that made me laugh was when you went to like the price, it said we could tell you how much, but then we'd have to kill you, which always tickled me. And like using it was just out of control. Wild Thing 2000, I remember it was called. Absolutely loved it. I didn't play much of the third one though, which came out in 1995. I remember wanting to. It's quite different because it had more of that sort of digitized art style, and I think that the Mega CD port and the 32-bit versions were all developed concurrently within EA, so they all kind of share assets. Whereas the Mega Drive one is a lot more like the original games, albeit with like the digitized sprites. And then the Mega CD version is sort of halfway between the two. And I have to say, out of every game on this list, the Mega CD version of this is the one that I haven't played. Did you get a chance to play it? Well, there it is. There it is.
I mean, well, actually, this is a repro. This is actually a repro. It's not the original game, but it's a pretty good repro. Because I don't think it ever came out as a PAL game, or did it? One of the two. It's either, it didn't come out as a PAL game, it didn't come out in the US. One of the two. But yeah, this is a repro. I didn't play it back in the day because it was one of them games that was just kind of unattainable. You just never saw it. And I was aware of it, and I knew that it was a mashup, like you say quite rightly, of Road Rash 3 for the Mega Drive, and then the 32-bit versions. I'm a little bit, it's kind of quite fresh in my mind because I just mentioned I did watch that video again today, that Road Rash video from Digital Foundry. Road Rash 3 I did play back in the day when it came out. A friend of mine got it, and it would have been right at the tail end of the Mega Drive era, because I think I probably was looking at getting a Saturn then around that time. All the dates mixed together, but I remember seeing it and being surprised that it existed, because I was thinking, what? There's a third one, coming out in 1995. Obviously people looking to the future when it's the next set of consoles that were coming out.
Yeah.
So when that kind of arrived, and like my friend holding it, I was like, oh god, let's have a look at this. Let's have a play this. And obviously since I've subsequently played it on the quite extensively actually on the PSP, and yeah, it's a great port. I think it's the change in visual style with the digitized riders and things is a little bit odd compared to the previous two, but it's Road Rash essentially. It's more of the same. I've got a bone to pick with Road Rash though, I must say at this point. In every single version of Road Rash, when the rider punches with his right hand, you don't lose any speed. And as we all know, the throttle is on the right hand. So letting go of the throttle to punch somebody, you would decelerate. And it's never like even hinted at or brought up in any of the games. I'm just like, what? How is he keeping speed if he's like, unless he's got one of them sort of, I don't know, one of them cruise control things that you can get. I don't know, but I highly doubt it.
in the early 90s, though. That's another one. We're two games into the 16-bit era, and you've ruined out Hang On for me. And now Road Rash. I'm going to be able to look at that now without thinking. But yeah, he's not going to have cruise control on a superbike in the 90s, I wouldn't think. So yeah, it's great unless he's quickly swapping. I don't know. You'd lose control if you tried to swap your hands over.
I don't know. For some reason,
it doesn't work, does it?
I was trying to remember if he kind of punched over himself, but he doesn't. He actually does that. So yeah, for the benefit of the people listening to the audio version, I'm mimicking holding handlebars on a motorbike and then trying to punch across myself with my left hand. So that's just for you on the audio stream.
I'm pretty sure they just do the same sprite when he's punching left, but invert it.
They do.
Yeah, but they're all great. But ones that were really impressive, even though we're talking 16-bit now, there's the 8-bit versions, which came to the Master System and Game Gear, and they're extremely impressive for the hardware. If we're talking about Hang On, GP Rider, but even though the frame rate's low on Road Rash, which I think it is for the Mega Drive version as well because of the complexity, you still have the undulating terrain, you still have all the other riders, and it's pretty much, as far as the first game goes, it's pretty much feature complete, isn't it? Did you play these before?
I did play
this week.
Yeah, I did play the Game Gear version because I had it back in the 90s. Sorry if you can hear the dog barking outside. The window's open. Apologies. But
that's right. Can't hear anything at the moment.
Cool. But yeah, I did play the Game Gear version, and as you say, it was really impressive, feature complete, and not. There was a period in time when you got a portable version of a game that was also on the sort of the big consoles or the home consoles. There was always caveats when there was always cut down. It was always didn't look as good, but the Game Gear version really does stand up. But it's smooth. It's just as enjoyable to play. It's got all of the bikes. It's essentially just a toned down Mega Drive game. So it's really impressive. The Master System one I haven't played. in the day because I didn't have a mass system. But again, I have watched the video from DF Retro, and yeah, it does look really impressive. So, and what about yourself? Did you play either of these back in the day, or since?
Yeah, Road Rash. My sister had it on her Game Gear back in the day, so I played that a fair bit on the go when I could get my hands on it, and she'd let me play it. The Master System one I didn't play until years later, which I just played. I was playing it emulated in the 2000s sometime, just when it's emulation's new, and I'm going to try every single game that I can. And then obviously I refreshed my memory playing it recently, and it still holds up as a brilliant version of the game. It's one that you think. I don't know whose idea it was to port Road Rash to the Master System. Someone said that they were going to port it to the Master System. You thought, well, what are you mad? Like, how are you going to achieve it? But they do really well.
Yeah, it's not that it's not that difficult. I mean, it's not that different in terms of the way it looks. Obviously the number of sprites is scaled back, and things are a little bit smaller, but and a little bit more basic looking. But for all intents and purposes, it is the same. It's got the undulation of the road. It's got the sweep-in turns and everything like that. So I think they did a really good job of putting it onto to lesser hardware.
Yeah, they really did. And there's going to be an 8-bit port of a game we're talking about next, which is a favorite of yours, I think, or at least you've got a story behind this one. And this is Kawasaki's Superbike Challenge. Came to the Mega Drive and the Game Gear in 1994, and is actually a polygonal racer, or at least it features some polygons in there, which makes it pretty visually impressive. And as I understand it, Tom, you spent a fair bit of time with this one, or at least you had it for a fair bit of time.
Yeah. Kawasaki Superbike Challenge for the Mega Drive, as you correctly alluded to there. It's a game that features polygons on the Mega Drive, and one that runs exceptionally well for a Mega Drive game as well. Obviously, it didn't have any of that Super FX stuff that the Super Nintendo had, and by this point, the SVP chip wasn't even a thing. So how Domac got this game to run as well as it does on the Mega Drive, hats off to them. It's not.
Sorry, Tom. I was going to say I think this actually did come out after the SVP chip, so it came out after Virtual Racing, but it doesn't have the chip in there, which coming back to what your point is, it's still an amazing feat. So yeah, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, I just wanted to say that point. It came out after the SVP, but it's probably even more impressive because of that.
Totally, and just to go back to the sort of the history of this game, it was actually released as a Formula One game called F1 on the Mega Drive, which I played previously. And was really wowed by the polygonal visuals and just how well the game controlled. Kawasaki Superbike, my dad rented it from a local video shop, and it happened to stay in his house for about 6 months because he forgot to take it back. I don't know how much he was fined when he did eventually return it, but we spent 6 months of weekends. We used to go and visit my dad at the weekend, and he had a Mega Drive at his house, and every time I'd go there, Kawasaki Superbike was still on the mantelpiece. It's like, it's still there. He's still not taking it back. But that's just testament to how good it was. It was such a great game, and I've recently revisited it, and it looks really basic by today's standards, obviously. But the one thing that you can't take away from it is just how smooth it plays and just how much fun it is. It's a little bit basic in terms of gameplay. Like it's really hard to actually. You can't actually come off the bike. You can crash the bike into like trackside objects, but all that does is basically stop you dead and then put you back on the track again. And it's actually difficult. In a lot of modern games, you do find that in the pursuits of realism, actually coming off the bike and sliding down the track is actually something that you've got to be aware of. Whereas in Superbike Challenge, because it's quite basic, that's not something you have to worry about. Or you guys getting around the track, and winning the races. And for a Mega Drive game, it's got quite a lot of advanced features. It's got different weather effects. You can mess with the setup of the bike. You've got different real world tracks, real world circuits. And it's obviously got the Kawasaki license in there as well. So it's not got like real riders or anything like that. So it's not got an actual real Superbike championship attached to it. But, played from that first person view, which again is quite unique on the Mega Drive. Because a lot of them are like behind the bike third person, whereas this was in the cockpit with the little rudimentary cockpit and the rider's hands at the bottom of the screen. It was kind of a bit of a breath of fresh air, I think, and a game that I loved back then and I still love now. And is it worth talking about the Game Gear port at this point as well? Did you have any thoughts on the Mega Drive?
Yeah, I didn't play this until a little bit later. So, but I think it's quite an achievement for what it did. And as you say, it looks quite basic by comparison. And I think if you compare it to something like Road Rash or Super Hang-On, it looks maybe a little bare because everything big, flat shaded polygons.
Yeah.
And but somehow you still get that sense of speed. That sense of speed's still there. It feels, and I think it's that first-person view and the polygons combined with kind of how smooth it is. I mean, it's not 60 frames per second, but it's probably about 20 or 30 or something. But it's smoother than something like Hard Driving on the Mega Drive, for example. And it just feels a lot more immersive. The way that it plays, you can kind of you get that feeling that you get from polygonal games of the era, that it feels like you're actually in the vehicle, which is really impressive. So there's a lot of content in there. Do like how I think it's Brands Hatch, isn't it? Is the first track that you start.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
And then yeah, it's got a decent selection of other tracks. So I can see why you spent six months of weekends playing it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff in
Great
there.
Game.
So it's I think it's really impressive. And then the Game Gear port was pretty impressive too. And then that's something I hadn't played until this week. But yeah, it's a great little approximation of that. A lot more. Obviously, it's all completely flat sprites on the Game Gear version, but still quite an impressive and in-depth game.
It would have been interesting to see if they ever even thought about trying to replicate the Mega Drive version on the Game Gear, because isn't Hard Driving? I know Hard Driving is on the Game Boy with the sort of weird polygonal sort of flat awfulness of the Game Boy screen. Yeah. But I wonder how well that would have come off if they tried to put it onto the Game Gear instead of doing what they did with a more sort of orthodox kind of sprite-based behind the bike type racing game, But
yeah, I know. One of the things that I was thinking of when I was playing the Mega Drive version was, God, did you ever play a game called Stunt Racer?
Yes,
which was, I think it was like a very early polygonal game that was basically on everything. I think James talks about it. I think he played it on the Amiga, which I think was the main version, but I played it on the Commodore 64, which was obviously an old 8-bit home computer at the time. Just thinking maybe if they tried something like that on one of the kind of the 8-bit consoles, or the Game Gear in this case, might have pulled something off with that might have been pretty cool for them to attempt. But I think it works well enough. Interestingly, the Super Nintendo version is almost completely sprite based. It doesn't have as much of the polygonal drawing or the 3D effects that the Mega Drive version has. So is pretty much universally agreed to be the inferior version, because obviously, like the Mega Drive version doesn't use the s5e. Without the Super FX chip, the SNES is basically around half the clock speed of the Mega Drive. So if it's not using Mode 7 or anything like that, if it's relying on pure grunt to draw polygons, then it's suffering really. So yeah, that's quite interesting that the SNES version is also completely sprite based. But I think for some reason all the games got pretty mixed reviews in the past. But playing them now, obviously the Game Gear and the Mega Drive ones, I think they're absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. I think I mentioned to you that one of the details I like in the Game Gear version is the way the rider constantly kind of looks over his shoulder, and you can see him doing it as if someone's coming up behind you, look over his shoulder to see who's coming. And I know you can look behind you in modern racing games, but that's not something I'd seen, in a game up until that point.
Yeah.
You don't see it in Hang On, you don't see it in Road Rash, you don't see it in any of the other games we've talked about. So this was a really nice little touch, I thought.
Yeah, it is. It just adds, because that's what you do as a rider, isn't it? If you're passing someone, you're going to check your blind spots.
It's called your lifesaver when you check over your shoulder. So, yeah,
it's a really cool. I suppose that's how you know that it's a game made by motorcycle aficionados, is that they've got little details like that.
Could be.
So yeah, it's another one that I didn't actually notice until you pointed that one out. So that was a great spot on there. So when I booted it up again earlier on today, I was like, all right, I'll keep my eye out for this little detail now when he goes past the other riders. So that was a great spot, that one. That is us done with the 16-bit era. So we'll jump into the 32-bit era. And I'm really sorry, Tom. Before we get into the Saturn, we've got to talk about the 32X game on this list. Oh dear. Right. We won't spend too long on this one. Motocross Championship on the 32X, released in 1994. I think it was within the first month or so of the add-on coming out. Came from a company called Artec, and oh God, this is it's so bad. It's easily the worst game on this list, and probably one of the worst games I've ever played on any Sega hardware.
I
It's
don't know
just nothing seems to work
what
in
it
it.
is about. I don't know what it is about motocross games from that era, but they all seem to kind of follow the same kind of mold, don't they? That you're behind the bike, you've got about 3 foot of draw distance, and it moves at about 8 frames a second. And that's regardless of
Yeah.
what platform it's on. It's like a rite of passage that it has to have those things. And this is no different. Motocross Championship is just turgid into it. Can you imagine getting a 32X thinking you're going to get an upgrade to your Mega, and that's the game? You'd be like, what is this? I'm just going to put Road Rash back on.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Shocking.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's just like, I mean, it puts all those riders on the screen with you at once. I mean, it's not that many more than what you get in Super Hang-On and the Mega Drive at the start. Obviously, the colors are a little bit more varied, but and you go and it's just like the frame rate just tanks straight from the off. And then it's like you say, there's hardly any draw distance. This is we know that the Factorettes can do a lot better than that. We've seen ports of
Absolutely, yeah.
Afterburner and Space Harrier and of super scalar games and how good they look. And you've got these really weird sprites for the riders that really like looking like anemic. They're almost like stick characters to a bit with
Mm.
colors on them. And then it's just all over the place. And then you've just got people constantly crashing into you. They just seem the AI. I'm not even sure if it exists. Everyone. It's just like it's more like Destruction Derby on motocross than an actual racing game. It's atrocious. And then what you were saying about you're in a motocross and you're riding on dirt bikes through dirt, and then you get to a puddle and then you fall over, and it's just oh my God.
To me, that sounds like it smacks of the game designers going, right, we've finished the game. We know it's terrible, but we need to add some more challenge to it, maybe. So, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll put some mud on the mud. And if you ride through the mud that's on the mud, then you crash. Oh, it's a great idea. Put that in. Put that in. Like, what? Just to go back to something you said earlier as well about the chaos. Like you'd be riding along and bikes will just like fly sort of from like behind you, like a massive pixelated sprite will just appear, fly across, crash, and it's just this like constant like it's like some kind of like wacky race type setup in it. It's nonsensical. And there's no strategy to it at all, is it? It's just like hold the button down, go, steer, try and get around the corners, try not to crash into a puddle, try not to let other bikes overtake you arbitrarily because suddenly they can go faster. It's just terrible. It's just an awful, awful game. There's nothing else I can say about it other than that.
It's like putting the crank on the slot machine as to whether you're going to get poleaxed as you're going around. I think part of it is that every single car or every single bike seems to have like really strong rubber banding,
Yeah, yeah.
where no matter how far ahead number one is or how far behind, they all just sort of congregate, and it just turns into a complete mess like the rest of the game. So yeah, avoid at all costs. Let's move on.
Yes, let's.
Right, so. Next one is one that I think we'll probably have slightly differing opinions on. So we spoke about this over WhatsApp, and this is Hang On
Mm.
GP 95 if you're in Japan, GP 96 if you're in the West. A sequel apparently to Hang On by Genki. You weren't as much of a fan of it as this one, were you?
No, I think it was because I had high hopes for it when it came out. I had my Saturn by then, and when I saw it in the shop, video shop, I should also add, I rented this one. I didn't buy it at the time. I was really excited because I was like, memories of Hang On the Mega Drive. Oh, brilliant! They brought a new Hang On game. So on the Saturn, it's going to be great. I was expecting more of the same. I mean, obviously, you can look on the back of the box and you can see what it looks like, but I was kind of hoping it'd be like a more beefed up version of Hang On for the Mega Drive. And then playing it, I was just like, oh my word, this is terrible. I think that misconception of what it was going to be is what clouded my expectation for what it turned out to be, and that's why I don't hold it in such high regard. Again, I have played it since, and I've played it recently, obviously again in preparation for this, but it's not really changed my opinion. I just think it's still a personally think it's a terrible game. I don't like the handling. I think the tracks are uninspired. I think the music's poor. I did note that it had some kind of overhangs from like previous arcade games from Sega. Like, for example, the way the sort of the traffic light at the beginning, the green light is kind of rendered in this like little window, which is quite reminiscent of some arcade games from the 90s.
Yeah.
So that's a nice little throwback touch. But other than that, I wasn't a fan of it at all. I don't like the handling of the bikes. I just don't think it's very much fun. But you're going to tell me why I'm actually completely wrong, and it's actually the best thing since sliced bread. So please, Dan, the floor is yours.
No, I'm not going to say that it's going to be the best game ever. It's because it's certainly not, and I think there's a reason why we've got slightly differing views on that. But what I will say is, how very dare you? I think the music's absolutely sensational in this game. That one, I will say, I absolutely love the soundtrack to this. I think it's absolutely banging. I think Sega Lord X once said in a video, I'm not sure if it was a review or maybe it was something else. He said, and he wasn't a fan of this one at all, but he said that the music is the best thing about this experience.
I mean, you don't mind to argue with Sega Lord X, but he's wrong. He's wrong, and so are you.
Maybe so. But what I will say about this one, and I think if you come into this one expecting to play a game like Super Hang On or Hang On, absolutely you're going to be disappointed. I didn't actually play this until years later, until I want to say 2006. I got a Japanese copy, and at the time I knew who developed it. I knew it was Genki, and this is post Tokyo Highway Battle, Drift King, and all that sort of stuff. And when I play that, and when I look at Hang On GP, I think it's the most Genki Hang On that you could get, because it really is just those games, but with motorbikes. The tracks almost have a sort of a like a 32-bit highway battle vibe about them, albeit they're in the daytime, and that I kind of enjoy. Like I say, I do love the soundtrack to it. I think it does seem very much like classic 90s Sega to me, which is probably why I like it. And the handling, I play with the viewpoint all the way back, because it comes, the default view is way too close for me, and I think if you play in the first person view, I think it's pretty much unplayable in that state. If I play all the way back, then I find it quite enjoyable. For me, it's not a great game. It's like a 6-7 out of 10 experience, I think, at best. It's the most Genki race motorbike game you could probably get, and I think viewed as a Genki game rather than a Hang On game, you can get some fun out of it. You kind of do have to adjust to the handling, because you probably found it is if you brake or take your finger off the accelerator long enough and turn, and then try and hammer it down again, you kind of jump in like it's really weird. It goes off in kind of an angle, doesn't it? And then you can end up just overshooting your turns. If you get used to that, then I quite enjoyed it. But yeah, that was me. It's not the greatest game in the world. So yeah, for me, it's slightly above average. But for you were clearly nowhere near as impressed.
I've listened to everything you've said, and taken on board all of your praise for the game, but you're still wrong. No. I mean, okay, two redeeming features, two things that I actually quite liked about Hang On GP. The first one is kudos for putting in a proper cockpit view, because a lot of these games didn't have that. They just had a first-person sort of helmet cam with no cockpit. So fair play for that. Second thing that I did quite like is when you're on the grass at the side of the track and you try to accelerate off the grass, it does actually feel like the back wheel is spinning, and it sort of spins the bike round, as opposed to just kind of going all over the place, which is what would actually happen on a bike, because obviously motorbikes are rear-wheel drive. So if you're on a slippy surface, the back will try to flip out, and that does actually happen in Hang On GP. So I appreciated that. But I mean, I'm struggling to think of anything else that I can praise it for, to be honest.
Look, I'm happy to be called wrong. I'm
No,
not
no, I'm
the I'm not
joking.
not the motorcycle aficionado.
No, but yeah.
But yeah, uh, I think if people can play it on an ODE or emulated or something, it might be worth a try. And yeah, it'd be interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's nowhere near what the classic hang-on games are like, so it's still a disappointment, whichever one of us people may listen to. But yeah, it's a weird one. But for me, it definitely feels like the Genki in their purest, like sort of janky, sort of cobbled together racer form. Sometimes they're great, sometimes not so much. But
Yeah.
there we go. But the next one is definitely one of some good gaming stock from the series that we've already talked about, and that is Road Rash on the Sega Saturn. Now this one was developed alongside Road Rash on the Mega CD and Road Rash 3, but it was a port of the 3DO version that was developed in that time. This one I wanted to play it for years and didn't actually play it until I was able to emulate it. And I've been playing it a fair bit since I got my Fenrir. Uh, I know you got a copy of this not too long ago. Did you have it back in the day as well?
I did, yeah. Well,
Yeah, it's
I didn't have it on the Saturn. I had it on the. I had a very brief period where I had a PlayStation, so I
mhm.
got it for the PlayStation. Played it on the PlayStation, thought it was great. Bit later on, when I started properly collecting consoles again, I got a 3DO, and the first game I went to get was Road Rash, which I got, and again, brilliant game. And then, in later years, I got the Sega Saturn version, which I've got up here behind me on the shelf. And yeah, uh, again, a brilliant kind of upgrade from the 16-bit games. I mean, what more can we say about Road Rash? I mean, this version I think is probably the ultimate version of the game. Yeah, it's just a masterclass in like that kind of 90s digitized sprite work into in the yeah it was just something else. It was such a leap above against the 16-bit games that
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I don't know how many more superlatives pull out, but it was just such a great. It was a great game. It still is a great game. So, yeah, I'm a big fan.
Yeah,
What about yourself, Dan?
it's an interesting one because you start with the you start in the city in this one, don't you?
Yeah,
So you go from the single carriageways and the country roads, which are quite quaint, and the mountain backgrounds. Whereas in this one, it plonks you straight into like a four carriageway like a four-lane road in the middle of like a crowded town, which as a visual spectacle is pretty fantastic. I think it changes the vibe of it a little bit. You're not like a bunch of bikers out in the American wilderness smashing lumps out of each other and hooning it down the highways. Um, it makes it a little more, dare I say, a little bit more exciting because there's so much else going on in there.
mm,
And it also, I think the wider roads actually make it a little bit more approachable from a gameplay perspective because there's more hazards, obviously, but it just feels like you're not having to keep on this narrow strip of road to avoid running into a sign or a cow or something
yeah,
like
yeah,
you do in the original games. Obviously, as a leap forward, it's fantastic. You've got it's not entirely polygonal, is it? I don't think there'd be an entirely polygonal Road Rash until one of the PlayStation
yes,
games.
that's right. Yeah,
Um, but the riders are sprite based, but it all looks decent, I think, on this one. This one hasn't got like the intros, has it, of the 3DO game? Is it, or
yes,
or am I thinking of something
I believe
different?
it does. Yeah, it does have all the does have all
It
the
does.
FMV and all of the sort of the weirdly distorted like artwork for all the different riders and people that you meet
Yeah,
in the career mode, and you've got the you've got the shop, and you've got the what was it, the Panzer Club, where you go to find your races, and
yeah,
then yeah, it's a real sort of tour de force, if that's the right word. I mean, I know that's the subtitle to the
yeah,
third game, Tour de Force, I think so. But
yeah. It is.
yeah,
Yeah, it
just
is.
to use it to use a phrase, but yeah, it's just everything. It just encapsulates that period, doesn't it? That 90s kind of vibe. It's just so cool. All the little additions that they put in with the advanced engines, such as like the branching paths and the sort of the fully built up more urban areas with the buildings and things. And there's more vehicles. There's more. Why are there so many people like just hanging around in the middle of the road? Like why? There's new weapons. There's new hazards to kind of negotiate. And yeah, just a really good game. I was, again, doing some research into this topic before we came on the call. I was just reading loads of like trivia and stuff about Road Rash and about that particular version and how they. I mean, you can see this if you go on Wikipedia. It's not like really hard to find stuff, but just little incidental things like, for example, one of the bikes that they used in the cutscenes, they rented it from a bike rental place, and they scratched it, so they couldn't take it back because they wouldn't accept it because they'd scratched it. And apparently, you can see in some of the clips that were filmed after the bike had been dropped, you can still see the scratches on the bike. And then that bike went on to be showcased in the headquarters lobby of Electronic Arts as a sort of
Oh wow.
like an homage, like a museum piece, because they had to buy the bike off this rental place because they damaged it. It's a little incidental thing that are really quite cool, and it makes you realize that it's like real people like putting all this stuff together that we enjoy. But yeah, the 32-bit version of Road Rash is just an all-time classic. And it's one of them games that I'm always really annoyed that I can't get it to run like in emulation. Like I tried to play I've got the PS1 version as well. I really wanted to play it on the PS2. Doesn't run.
Yeah.
Tried to get
Oh
it to
really?
work. I tried to get the PS1 version to work on my PSP Go. Won't work. It might be something I'm doing wrong. It might be fully playable under emulation. I'm just doing something completely wrong. I'm sure people will tell me if I am. But yeah, it was a bit of a disappointment when I realized I couldn't get it to work on my PSP because I just really wanted to play it on the go. I mean, I've still got the other versions, 1, 2, and 3, but I really wanted the 32-bit version on on the go. But alas, I haven't been able to do it.
That's a shame.
So yeah, put
That's
a
a brilliant game.
comment below. That's what they do on YouTube, innit? Comment below if you know how to do it,
Yeah.
because I'd like to get it on my PSP.
Help Tom's road rash addiction. Oh, it's super. All right. Rounding out the 32-bit era now is an all-time classic. Another one that I spied on the shelf just behind you. Um, Arcade Racer from I think it's AM3, Manx TT Superbike, came to the arcade in 1996 via Model 2, and then the Sega Saturn in 1997, obviously based on the famous Isle of Man race. And yeah, it's as far as content, a little bit lacking, but for me, mate, it's one of the best. It just plays so well, and I think it still does. Did you play this one back in the day?
I can't remember. I honestly can't remember. I can't remember if I'd got rid of my Saturn by the time it came out, but I was aware of it because obviously Saturn games were getting few and far between, especially ones of such high caliber
Hmm.
and with such fanfare around them. But I remember like when things like Sega Touring Car came out, it was like the reason to have a Saturn was these big arcade ports, and then when Manx TT came along, it was like, oh, that's interesting. That's on a Saturn now. So yeah, I was very much aware of it. Obviously, seen magazines and stuff. But obviously I own it now, and I can't remember if I played it back then or I played it after the fact and went back to it. But I'd agree with you. I'm a big fan of it. I like to be honest with you, I like the less is more approach to a lot of these arcade races. I know that now gamers get a bit annoyed if a game hasn't got like 5 million tracks or something or whatever. But
Yeah.
because the tracks are curated in such a way that they need to be playable in an arcade sense and memorable. Um, I think that's why it works. Like with like Sega Rally, with its 3 or 4 with lakeside tracks, it works. And you couldn't get away with that now. You get called all the names under the sun if you release the game with just 2 tracks, which is what it is. 2 tracks, isn't it, in Manx DT?
It's just two,
Yeah.
yeah, just the two. Um,
So
so
yeah, I mean,
I always,
since then
yeah,
I've
go on.
played. Oh, sorry, I was going to say since then I've played a lot of Isle of Man TT games. The latest one being Isle of Man TT3, Ride on the Edge. And that is just like a full recreation of the island, of the Isle of Man. It's a brilliant game. And then when you go back to something like Lanx TT, you see the sort of the approximation of what they deemed the track to be like. It's basically a very small snapshot of the island, and it's
Hmm.
taking memorable locations from the Manx TT course and sort of smushing them all together in a very small uh, bit of piece of circuit. But it's in that there's a charm. Do you know what I mean? You can see the noticeable, recognizable places that they're meant to be. So it's good. It's nice to go back to it in the current year, having played subsequent more modern Isle of Man TT games to see what they were going for with the limitations of that type of game. You couldn't have a 37-minute lap of the full Isle of Man mountain course on an arcade game. Do you know what I mean? So they had to do something to condense it. And I just think it's really, really cool. The whole game is just, it's time capsule of like the Isle of Man of the 90s, the Isle of Man TT of the 90s. Sorry, I feel like I've just
Yeah.
waffled at you there for like 5 minutes straight. So
No,
tell me your
no, it's
experiences with it and memories and things.
yeah. I did actually play this back in the day. I didn't own it myself, but other people bought it. I actually inherited it, so I borrowed it off a few mates. A few mates had Sega Saturns in I think they got it for Christmas '97, and ended up, probably the worst time to get a Sega Saturn was Christmas 1997. But I think a few of them had Manx TT bundled with it, and as they kind of moved on from the Saturn later on, a few of them sold it and stuff, and somehow ended up with one of my friends' copies of Manx TT, which I played. I didn't have the case though for some reason. I think they lost the case, and then it was quite frustratingly when I moved in with my now wife. I didn't have my Sega Saturn for a few years. And then when I brought it up and unpacked it and everything, I got Manx TT out and the disc just wouldn't work. So I had to buy another copy of it. But yeah, it's a great game. And, you saying that you just threw a load of words at me there. Just what I loved about what you just said, though, Tom, is just how Sega, especially you having that sort of other Isle of Man games, is about Sega taking, parts of the course and putting them into a small arcade course. And it's quite interesting when you think about if you look back on, if you've seen Pandemonium Sega Rally video, and he talks about how, what they were doing there is they were taking the Safari rally course, which
Yeah.
Safari is like, it's hundreds of miles, and turn that into a 55-second circuit
53,
and trying to get
53
all.
seconds.
All right. Yeah, but it's taking that experience and condensing it into an arcade game, and I think that's exactly why, as you say, less is more. That it succeeds so well, and they're fantastic tracks, and they work. The big thing was made about them being played in reverse as well, and they work quite well in reverse. And there's been kind of competitions on X and social media and stuff doing time trials on those in various guises, so it works fantastically well. I think probably back in the day, if you've paid 45 quid for it and brought it home, you might have felt a little bit shortchanged, especially given that races then were evolving a little bit. Sega Rally was 18 months before this, and forget races were kind of moving on. I mean, you were talking earlier about Andretti Racing, and that had a huge career mode by comparison. But I think playing these games in the here and now, especially Manx TT, it really is it definitely is a classic up there with the best kind of arcade races of their day. It's still one that I love to go back to. I'm absolutely useless at it. I'm useless at most of these, but it's a tremendous fun. Great with the analog controller as well. It really must be said. And yeah, I think Tantalus, who did the port, had a massive job on their hands, but for all intents and purposes, it's a great conversion of the arcade game, which is no small feat considering how great the arcade game looks. So yeah, it's a massive success, I think, mate. Definitely up there with Road Rash as one of the best on the Saturn. Absolutely. Maybe even as good as Hang On GP.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I mean, no conversation about Manx TT can pass without the famous soundbite. So are you going to do the honors for us?
Do you know what's quite funny, actually? Hang On GP has its own passing the checkpoint, which is nowhere near as good as passing the checkpoint, which I'm trying to do, but obviously nowhere near as good as obviously the original or Mr. Segaholic does. He does a great little version of it. I don't know if you wanted to have a go at it, mate.
Oh God,
yeah,
passing the checkpoint.
That was decent.
One little detail I did notice in Manx TT, which I actually thought was really cool, which I don't think I've seen in any other Saturn game, was when you go through a tunnel, and then when you come out of the tunnel, the screen goes white as if you're coming back into the sunshine. I think that was a really nice touch. And I remember when I first saw that, I thought, well, that's a nice little effect. Because I mean, that might be, well, it is really common now with lighting effects in games, but back then it was a kind of they were kind of faking it, coming back out into the sunshine. So yeah, that always just stuck with me because I just thought it was a really cool effect. So yeah, and of course you can ride on sheep
Yeah,
as well, can't you?
yeah, you can.
Yeah.
You know, that's a good point about that lighting effect, because yeah, you don't see that in Sega Rally or Daytona USA. I
No,
know for a fact you don't see it in Sega Rally
no.
because when I was doing the comparison with Overdrump, obviously I was studying like kind of frame by frame as you go through the tunnel, and
Mm,
obviously you can see everything coming out of there. You don't get, so yeah, it's a really good touch. And of course you got the sheep as
yeah.
well, which that was the that's what you were aiming for, wasn't it, to unlock the sheep?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great wacky little extra there, but yeah, great game. We're on to the 128-bit era now, mate. So stuff that you've kind of cut your teeth on and spoken about a few times on here. So I think we'll start off with one. um we'll start off with two, actually, because it's two different names, two different games arguably.
Yeah.
So Redline Racer, released in the West as Suzuki Alster Racing. It's actually a game from Criterion. Obviously, people know from the Burnout
Yeah. Yeah.
games. It was originally a PC port. Now, I actually read something quite interesting, mate. It was on a site called the Dreamcast Junkyard by a guy called Tom Charnock.
No,
Wrote a pretty
I'm,
interesting article
I'm
on
not
here.
familiar with that.
Heard of
Sorry.
it? But yeah, so you've covered this one
Yeah.
before on the Junkyard, but playing these again, when I was preparing for this conversation, it really is quite understated. You know, every single Wikipedia article, every other article that I look at online, it just says, "Oh yeah, Red Line Racer, known as Suzuki Alster in the West." And really, when you play them, and it's like you say in your article, they are pretty much, aside from sharing the tracks, they're completely different
Yeah.
games.
It's
Like
quite.
the visuals are different,
It's yeah.
the HUD's different.
It's quite sort of alarming, really, when you first kind of see them side by side, because you just, like you say, you assume it's just a port with a license slapped on it. But then when you actually sit them down side by side, the overhaul of the visuals is just night and day. It's like playing a PC game when it was on the lowest settings, and then in Suzuki All-Star, it's on the highest settings. You know what I mean? It's just completely different. I mean, most of the menus and the way the game works is quite similar, but yeah, the sort of the Western release, if you want to call it that, is just so much more well-rounded. Maybe just because it had more development time, I don't know. But the original Redline Racer game is basically a straight port of the PC game, whereas Suzuki All Star is more of a Dreamcast specific. I know it was released again as Suzuki All Star for the PC, subsequently to the Dreamcast. But
Oh,
yeah, Redline Racer and Suzuki All Star is weird. They are strange bedfellows, as the term. I'm probably using that incorrectly, but the different sides of the same coin. And yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Suzuki Alster is a fantastic arcade racer. It's so playable. The bikes handle really well.
yeah,
The tracks, some of them are quite forgettable, but some of them are actually about as close to Manx TT as you can get on a Dreamcast. Some of the more rural sort of countryside tracks. If you blink, just briefly look at the screen, you'd think you were playing Manx TT on a Dreamcast. That's just how. I
yeah,
wonder if they were actually even going for that sort of vibe when they actually put the game together. Um, but yeah, it's got a nice sort of championship mode where you kind of get promoted from being like a reserve driver into the main sort of Suzuki All-Star team. You can unlock new bikes, you unlock new tracks. It's quite sort of traditional in that sense as an arcade racer. You start
mhm,
with three tracks, one bike, and by the end of it, you've unlocked about 12 tracks and about four or five different, six maybe different Suzuki bikes. With improved stats and things, there's not really a great deal more to it than that. It's definitely a game that you could probably finish in a weekend. If you'd rented it back in the day from like
yeah,
Blockbuster or something. But as it is, it looks. I mean, the Suzuki All-Star looks nice. Redline Racing not so much. Plays pretty well, and it's just a pretty bog standard arcade racer, really. There's not many bells and whistles. I mean, I quite like it. I've got a bit of a soft spot for it because it is quite playable. So yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are, Dan,
yeah.
on that.
I'm very similar. Very similar. I think that Suzuki Alster is really playable. I actually think that Redline Racing, Redline, if you played Redline, I think that's very, very much enjoyable in
Oh
its
yeah,
own
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Um, um, I when I started playing that the other day, and from coming back to me, the rural track is probably the first one on there, and yeah, it's just a load of fun to play through there. The controls are really easy going,
Yeah.
but there's the right amount of kind of weight and challenge to it that it's not. It's just very enjoyable. And then obviously Suzuki Alstera is such a decent jump up. I found it hard. I was switching between the two, and I found it hard going back to Redline after you've been on Suzuki Alstera. And everything, just from even the HUD, just looks so much better on Suzuki Alstera. And you go back to Redline, you just think, oh, this is literally just a Windows CE, just drag and drop over onto a Dreamcast GD-ROM. It's quite interesting how the tracks are. The available tracks are different because you get free at the start of each. The menus are quite similar.
Yeah.
They're kind of like you're squinting, they're the same, but then you get 3 different starting tracks for each. I think the only common one is the snow one.
Yeah.
That you get between the two.
I think just maybe they just wanted to like mix it up a bit, didn't they? Like, oh, let's just
Yeah.
do what we can to make it as different to Redline Racers as we can. So you could say it's a different game. No. It's a different game. No.
Yeah. Oh, didn't I buy this one on an import? No, it's a completely new game. We've had one £40. What about second £40? So
I did enjoy the way that I think this is the only game in any of these we've spoken about where you actually race road bikes on dirt tracks and across beaches.
Yeah.
Suzuki GSXR across beaches is interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting prospect, but you can do it in Suzuki All-Star and Redline Racer. So
there's a lot of different biomes where you probably wouldn't expect to see superbikes, isn't there? Beaches, up snowy mountains and all sorts of stuff. It's like no, they're great. Unfortunately, the next two on Dreamcast probably not so much. So the first, Jeremy McGrath Supercross, which is a port of a PlayStation game, and this is when Acclaim were just trying to get that Tony Hawk's money. Every game had some sort of Dave Mirra or someone's name and smashed across it. So Jeremy McGrath had this one, and I have to say, mate, this one. It was so unoptimized, especially for a game that came from, it was on the N64 and the PS1s. You'd think the Dreamcast should have just been able to do this in its sleep, but I kept finding that the frame rate just completely tanks. If you're not like on a corner looking at your bike on its own, the frame rate's fine. But the frame rate's fine in that instance. But if you're looking at on the track and kind of you're seeing the wide open play space, or you've got other riders on the screen, it just all falls apart. And it was just it wasn't the worst. It certainly wasn't Motocross Championship on the 32X back, but it was. I found it pretty challenging. What about yourself?
I totally agree with everything you've said. It comes from that era of Acclaim Sports, kind of like shovelware, doesn't it? Where they were just trying to get everything onto every console without really giving much of a thought about how well it played or looked. Because there was a period where Acclaim were a really like highly kind of acclaimed studio. They had like the Turok Dinosaur Hunter series at the beginning of the N64 period, and then over time, and then they had that WWF Warzone. But then over time, their games and releases just kind of dipped in quality until they eventually just kind of imploded. And this is a really good example of how quality control just kind of went out the window with as time went on. Like you say, bad frame rate. It's essentially a PS1 game. I find it unplayable. It's so jittery, and it's just not fun either.
Yeah.
The main point of playing a game, arguably, is to have fun. And Supercross ain't fun. It's an ordeal, if anything. It's one of them games that is always super cheap, and for good reason, because it is, as I just said, it's literally just like it's the equivalent of shovelware on the Dreamcast. It's just awful. I mean, what's good to say about it? It's got different like CC classes of bikes. I suppose that's interesting. You can look at different models of Supercross bikes. Other than that, there's just not a lot to it, really, is there? It's just it follows in the footsteps, as you say, of the other motocross games that we've spoken about. There is one we're going to talk about very shortly that's actually decent. I mean, an Enduro race is decent as well, but there just seems to be this kind of certainly in this period, this like 90s, 2000s period, where motocross games were just a bit a bit bad, apart from Excite Bike 64. So
Yeah,
yeah, maybe I'm talking
I
rubbish there a
don't know
bit.
what motocross they were watching when they were making these games, but it's not, as I say, it's not as bad as as the 32X game, but it bears a similar hallmarks in that it just turns into a bit of a scrum and just like a mess of bikers in the mud. Yeah, it's not great, and unfortunately, the next game isn't great either. Also from Acclaim.
Hmm.
This is a PC port. Yeah, what were you saying about shovelware? This is Ducati World. God, this is a strange
It
one.
is.
It's it's so do you know, I've not really noticed many games on Dreamcast with like LOD popping, with level of detail popping,
Mm.
but this one, like you get textures loading like about 4 feet in front of your
Yeah,
bike. Like you'll see like the really pixelated lights as you're going into the tunnel. And I think the worst criticism, graphics, the graphics aren't even anything special, but for some reason it just seems to really struggle. But I think the worst complaint that I could throw at this one is it's just really boring.
yeah,
There's just no sense of speed or excitement. And I think the first few tracks you can just literally hold the trigger button down and you can probably just steer around everything at full speed, which feels like about 30 miles an hour, and just win the race. I don't know if that's your experience of it as well.
absolutely. For starters, it does look like a PlayStation 1 game, doesn't it? I mean, I'm not saying that PlayStation
Yeah.
1 games look bad, because there are some phenomenal looking PS1 games, but it's got everything that makes PS1 games bad. They're all here. You've got texture
Yeah.
warping, you've got, like you say, LOD, pop in. The way that everything just warps around as you're racing, it's bizarre. It's like you're on like some kind of acid trip or something. But I think the biggest thing about this game, the biggest thing for me about this game is just how disappointing it is, because it had all the ingredients of being a really good game. It's got a really well thought out career mode where you can like tinker with the bikes, you can like do licenses. There's nothing else like this in terms of motorcycle games on the Dreamcast. So it could have stood out as something quite unique in that it does have a really good, well thought out career mode. And of course, it has the Ducati license attached to it. So it's got all licensed bikes. Going back through the ages, you've got the retro bikes all the way up to the modern day, different bikes in different classes, and you could tinker with and mess with the engines and the different components and things. And then you get out onto the track and it just all falls apart. And it's just like, what the hell is this? Somebody at Ducati must have gone, you're making our brand look bad. If I was in charge of Ducati and they brought me that, I'd just said no. We're not we're not putting that out. Absolutely not.
Yeah.
But that's why it's so annoying. It's because there was nothing else like it on the Dreamcast. On the PS1, you had, well, on subsequent consoles, you've had all these other things like Tourist Trophy, and they had
Mm.
career modes in them, but there was nothing like it on the Dreamcast. So that's why it's just such a massive missed opportunity. And again, Acclaim, right there in the
Yeah.
middle of it.
I think I think what it smacks of, I mean, as you say, the ingredients are there, and I think, as I said, the main issue for me is that it's just quite dull to ride around because there's no
Yeah,
sense of
of course, yeah.
speed. But I think a lot of it probably could have been fixed quite easily to make it quite an engaging game, one that wasn't so basic looking, one that didn't have so many visual blemishes, and one that a bit more speed, a bit more weight to some of the bikes, and it could have actually been an engaging game with, as you say, the career mode. I think, given that this came out early 2001, I think maybe it was the case that the writing was on the wall and the claim said, uh, this console is not supported anymore. We'll just kick it out as it is and won't
Yeah.
spend any more time on it. Might get a few sales from it.
I mean, you're probably not a million miles away from the truth there, to be honest. I mean, yeah, I mean, for all its shortfalls in terms of visuals, if it played well and was exciting, then I think the majority of people could have overlooked that. But it just doesn't. It's just boring, isn't it? It's just
It
if riding
is.
motorcycles was that boring in real life, nobody'd ride them. Do you know what I mean? It just wouldn't.
Well, I might.
Well, you might, yeah.
But yeah,
Pages.
Discharging. Right. Well, we're not going to leave the Dreamcast with that because I do like that you put on one more game on here, which isn't strictly just a motorcycle game, but
No.
it features a motorcycle prominently. Let's touch on Headhunter because I do love the motorcycle sections in there. The fact that you need to, it's been a while since I played it, but you have to get a certain number of points and time, don't you, in order to progress to the next section as you go through. And they're actually really addictive. I found them, and the weight behind and this is like completely opposite to Ducati. The weight and the sense of speed there is really palpable. So yeah, and imagine since you put it on this list, you're a big fan of these ones as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought it was really novel when I first played it. I wasn't expecting to be able to like traverse this like fully open world as Jack Wade, because obviously it's a Metal Gear Solid 2 sort of homage into it, Headhunter. And then
Yeah,
to be able to like kind of emerge from these like enclosed missions and then get on a motorbike and then travel around the city to different locations to do other missions or go back to the home base or go to your house. And then, like you say, there are mini games where you have to get like beat certain times and objectives to get like licenses and things. To
yeah, that's it. Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it was interesting and novel at the time. And I mean, the bike can be a bit of a pig sometimes to control because if you do slam down on the accelerator, it will go up. As a real
mm.
motorbike will do if you just pull the throttle, it will go up on its back wheel. Um, so it can take some getting used to stop it from just wheeling and then careening into the wall and things. But once you get the hang of it, it's actually really good fun just to ride around the city, on this bike in a game that isn't a motorcycle game, and it's arguably a better motorcycle game than Ducati World or Jeremy McGrath. So if you haven't
Yeah.
played Headhunter, it's a PAL exclusive, so maybe people in America maybe haven't played it. Um, do seek it out because it's worth it, I think, just to experience those bike sections, just again for the novelty value.
Yeah, it's crazy that it only came out in PAL regions. I think the PS2 version came out
Yeah,
worldwide. But obviously visually the Dreamcast version is better, and obviously with the use of the triggers, the bike versions probably play better. I'm sure I've got the PS2 version as well, but I've played it through. The only version I've finished it on is the Dreamcast version. But yeah, I mean, Headhunter as a game, I just think is superb. It's one of those games where you kind of have to, not so much on the bike, but I think the bike bit's great because it is just like a race, and as you say, if you feel the weight and the behavior of the bike feels kind of right, but the actual third person gameplay probably feels a little bit antiquated by today's standards.
yeah.
But I think it's one of those games where you kind of have to unlearn everything that you know today. And if you just get engaged with Headhunter, I think it's a really special game, to be honest. I know we're kind of deviating from the
No, I
the
think
bike chat now,
you've made
but
a really good point there, actually. I think with a lot of these games, all these bike games that I've been playing over the last sort of week or
mm,
so, just to get my head back into it and experience them again, and some of them for the first time, unlearning what I know from modern racing games has been a key to enjoying them because they don't have all of the same like inertial forces that you would expect in a modern game. One of the games I've been playing recently on my Series X is Ride 5. I think, yeah, Ride
mhm,
5 is there. Um, and because it is a modern game, you do have all of these things to take into consideration. You've got unlinked front and rear brakes. You've got all the different forces that are designed within the engine to make it as realistic, inverted commas, as possible. You can slide off, you can fall over if you go too slow, that kind of stuff.
mm,
In a lot of these games, that they weren't considerations. So you have to unlearn everything. And once you do, and you
mm.
consider how, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, how basic a lot of these games are, they actually become more fun. So there aren't all the variables that you would expect in a modern game. So they do just
Yeah.
become more simple and more just pure fun. I think.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is because of the restrictions at the time, but I think part of it is because at the time we were still very much even probably transitioned out of it at the time of the Dreamcast, but still a lot of these experiences were rooted in arcade gameplay, and
Mm.
they're probably still kind of transitioning away from that. So it's still kind of pick up and play and not have that the the realism, I suppose, and all the extra physics, etc. So yeah, you kind of, I'd imagine. I haven't played a lot. I do mean to play Ride 5 because I think visually it looks pretty
It is really
spectacular.
good. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I might have to. If you're recommending it, Tom, I might have to seek it out. But yeah, I do mean to try that. But yeah, I think there is still something. It's kind of like comparing. sensible soccer to FIFA
Yeah,
these
yeah.
days, isn't it? You know, you got your simulation and you got your kind of arcade style game.
Mm.
But yeah, and speaking of arcades, mate, so that's us getting to the end of the Dreamcast era. But now we'll just touch on the arcade games. So coming back to one that we touched on earlier, GP Rider. Um, one that I honestly hadn't spent an awful lot of time with this before now, and I think it was same with you. And this is a phenomenal looking game, isn't it?
Yeah, oh, yeah, yeah. I'm going to be completely honest with you. This game is one that I had not even heard of before we started researching to do this episode. It completely passed me by. And when I loaded it up and played it in MAME on my PC, and I was blown away by how good it looks. The big chunky sprites, that kind of almost like that Radmobile-esque sort of
Yeah,
like undulation of the world and all the little details as well. I mean, it's basic. It's as basic as an arcade game can get in terms of like options and things because it's an arcade game that never got a home port. So you choose your bike, automatic or manual. You get on it and you race, and that's it. You've got a timer. You've got to get around the track before the time runs out. But it's all the little incidental details that I noticed. For example, the guys stood at the side of the track when you have a crash with the yellow flags that start waving. I thought it was a really nice
yeah,
touch. You know, massive sprites, big chunky sprites. The bike looks huge and really kind of well drawn. Little details like when you crash, the rider will sort of run alongside the bike to try and bump start it and then jump on it. And I thought, wow,
yeah,
that is so cool. I've never seen that before in a game. You know, this game's from like the late 80s, early 90s. I
yeah,
think there's one thing about this game, and it carries on into a game we're going to talk about in a minute. I think somebody at Sega had a real thing for these sort of two-stroke 500cc sports bikes that were around at the time. I think one of them is it an RD 500? Basically, you know, from the back of the bike, you've got the two exhaust pipes at the top, and then you've either got
hmm
two below it or then two on the other side. And the two-stroke sports bikes that were quite big in the sort of late 80s and early 90s. So I think somebody at Sega must have had a thing for that flavor of motorcycle racing because there's two games from this period that feature bikes that look quite similar, and it's those sort of two-stroke sports bikes. Um, and one of them obviously is in GP Rider. But yeah, it's great fun. It's great fun. It looks brilliant, plays really well, and it's full of little details. And yeah, Dan, I'm sure you're going to agree with everything I've just said there. I'd hope so, you know. But then again, you do like Hang On GP, so
yeah.
you know we never know.
We all have our cross to bear. No, I got nothing more really to add. You've just summed it up perfectly. It's a fantastic arcade racer. I really love the perspective in this one because it's a little bit lower
Yeah,
down
yeah,
than say Hang On and Enduro Racer, which really just like you were saying about how well the motorbikes are drawn and how big they look. It just adds to that perspective of like there's kind of it just makes it look like a powerful beast that you're going
yeah,
to be riding.
yeah.
I love the perspective, and even when you're wheeling it along when you're falling off, which I did a lot, it looks fantastic. And even the guy looks tiny, like running next to it. It looks great. So yeah, it's a shame, and obviously we'll talk about otherwise. These are all arcade games that never came home, and it's probably goes for all of them. But I think this one, and probably one that we'll get onto, I think it's the last game we'll talk about. Um, it's a shame they never came home, especially never came to the Sega Saturn because the Saturn really was tailor made for these. I think this one was Sega System 32, which is what the Sister Saturn was initially based on before it went kind of more polygon focused. I suppose would it have been well received at the time? Possibly not, but we'd
Yeah,
have loved it playing it today. A Sega Saturn port of it.
yeah.
Um, Next one I've got on here was Motor Raid by AM1. This came out to the Model 2 board in 1997. Have you played this one?
I have played it, yes, but again, I've only played it on MAME, and up until you made me aware of it, I didn't know it existed. I've since discovered that it's playable in like Judgment and Yakuza
Yeah, it is.
as a bonus game, but I was completely oblivious to this one existing. So my first experience was literally in the past week, and yeah, it is literally like it kind of feels like. Do you remember that game on N64, Extreme G?
Extreme G, yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of that. It's kind of like a futuristic, kind of like light cycle-esque style game, isn't it? But with a
Yeah.
bit of I think you said in the notes you've got a bit of road rash in there as well with all the weapons. Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's more of a sort of futuristic take on motorcycle combat, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I said if Road Rash, Wipeout, and Hang On had a baby, but you've got. I think it's much. Saying Extreme G, it's much more Extreme G, or probably even more F-Zero than it is Wipeout. But yeah, Extreme G. I forgot about that. But yeah, that's a fantastic shout there. Yeah, I hadn't played this one at all actually until I was playing Yakuza Gaiden last year. The side story, or Like a Dragon Gaiden, the man who erased his name. That's when I first played it properly because it would have been having to go through a Model 2 emulator and all that sort of stuff, and
Mm.
it's just one I kept forgetting. And then I played it and I was hooked. I absolutely loved it. Played all the courses over and over again. I actually had I was going to do something of it for the channel, and then kind of got distracted by other stuff, but I absolutely loved it. Probably spent more time on that in that game than any other arcade game in there, and that had Daytona 2 in there, and I think I
Oh
played that
yeah,
more than
yeah.
Daytona 2. So it's superb. But yeah, I think, and another one is I don't think the Saturn probably, because of how complex the 3D visuals are, I think the Saturn would have probably struggled with this one. But it's a shame that it didn't come out. It would have been great to get an enhanced Dreamcast port, like we got with Dynamite Cop or um,
Mm.
Virtua Cop 2, which were Model 2 games that got enhanced for the Dreamcast. I think this could have been amazing on Dreamcast, throwing a few more tracks, maybe like a story or a career mode. This could have been phenomenal. And since we didn't have a Road Rash on there, a Sega futuristic take on that, it would have been wonderful, I think.
Yeah, I mean, well, Sega, when they didn't have, like, for example, they didn't have the EA Sports games, so they made their own. This could have been
Yeah,
sort of like an analog to that, couldn't it? You won't give us Road Rash, so we'll make our own. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say about a Saturn port because playing the game on main recently, it does have a very Saturn look to it, doesn't it? With the big
Yeah.
sort of chunky polygons. Did you play this one when it was like out, like when it was contemporary?
No, unfortunately not. Yeah, I knew of it, but I only got to play it when it was in the Yakuza games. It's one of those ones I
Right.
knew about it, but because of at the time, I don't think it emulated very well at all in MAME. So it had to be super Model 2 emulator, and I couldn't get that working for a bit, so it just kind of fell by the wayside. And then I was like,
Mm.
"Oh, Motor Raid, I'll play that in Yakuza," and I was in love with it instantly. Absolutely adore it. So yeah,
Yeah.
this is one this is a big fan of this one.
I think it's apart from the fact that it's come out now in Judgment and Yakuza, it's one of the ones that kind of got, I think, forgotten about maybe. And
It
it's
did.
just another one that, that kind of fell by the wayside. And this whole sort of topic has been a bit of a journey of discovery for me. And this is a game that I don't think I've ever heard of before. So it was really interesting and cool to see this. How many other games are going to be like that are, hidden within the annals of Sega's history that I've never even heard of before. So
I
yeah,
know there might even be ones that I try to find them all, but there's probably ones that I've missed on here as well. But I think it's easy to overlook this one. You look at when it came out, 1997. The year before, we'd had Virtua Fighter 3 and we'd had Scud Race, and then
yeah.
the year after, we might as well talk about it now, is Harley Davidson, the LA Riders. So I think it's probably easy to say, right, with this Model 2 futuristic racing game that didn't get a port anywhere has kind of just been almost forgotten about it because there was the Model 3
Mm.
games incoming, so it kind of got glossed over, which is it's just a little bit of a shame. But yeah, I think that's why it's not as well known. But I'm glad that it got a second lease of life in the Yakuza games.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Yeah. So yeah, so might as well go on to Harley Davidson and LA Riders. This one I've only ever played. Oh no, I did play this in the arcade back in the day, and this was a really cool arcade machine because you did have the bikes to sit on, and they were massive.
Oh,
I
like big
played this
Harley
on.
things, yeah.
Yeah, they were because I played it
Yeah.
on an arcade. There was an arcade machine in Hemel Hempstead, I remember. And yeah, it was a fantastic looking game. I played it. It must have been 1998 because I played it before the Dreamcast came out, and I was hoping that it would come to the Dreamcast, or I thought it was going to. Obviously, it never did. Playing it now over Supermodel. It's not the greatest because it's kind of an open world point to point racer kind of like Crazy Taxi, but nowhere with none of the craziness. So take Crazy Taxi, take the craziness out, and put in some Harley Davidsons, and you got a game that's cool with a decent soundtrack, but nowhere near as exciting.
It's just Taxi, not Crazy Taxi.
Yeah.
Just Taxi.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to play this one at all?
I did, yeah. I mean, I was aware of it, again, to use the phrase, back in the day, because it was always in magazines and stuff. You get the arcade,
Yeah.
what's coming out in the arcades, and this was shown. But I hadn't actually played it either in an arcade or anywhere really up until this week. I played it over emulation. The emulation wasn't great because it's not massively well supported, but I kind of got the gist of what it was. And just going back to how you described it, you described it as a more chilled out Crazy Taxi, and I get that. It's an open world. You ride around on a Harley Davidson, going to different points in the city, collecting power up, power point things in the shape of Harley Davidson, like badges. And before the timer runs out, I don't think there's really much more to it than that, is there? I mean,
No.
that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It's a nice chill out game. But yeah, I think it might just be another one of those games that kind of fell through the cracks, as the transition from Saturn to Dreamcast happened.
Yeah.
They were looking at things that, people might want to play at home because they made a lot of money in the arcade, and maybe this just wasn't that successful. I don't know. But I don't have the answer as to why it wasn't brought to the Dreamcast, because I think it would have probably played quite well on that platform.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would have done, but I think it's probably a combination of things, from kind of content to licenses and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah,
I think it
yeah.
had the Harley Davidson license, and it also had a licensed soundtrack. The soundtrack's decent on there as well. It's a solid game. I think when you've got Crazy Taxi in the wings, it really overshadows it. It's saying, go over here to collect this Harley Davidson bag. It's not like, take me to the feeler store. I want to go. I want to go Tower Records.
Yeah, I can see it getting quite samey and repetitive after a while. Once the I mean the appeal of a lot of these games, I think back in the day, was that they were so visually impressive, and you'd walk in and you'd see this big motorbike, and you'd see the visuals on the screen. You'd be like, "Wow, I want to play that. That looks cool." But then when you scratch beneath the surface, it's actually quite a I won't say dull, but it's quite a sort of monotonous kind of experience. So how well that would translate. But Crazy Taxi is a game out on its own because of the fact of how chaotic it is, and it is just a bit of a party game. Whereas it's not really the same with Harley Davidson. It's a bit more laid back and a bit more not as fun, but still equally quite technically impressive.
Yeah, I think it's, in Crazy Taxi, you've got your skills and your drifts and all the bonuses you earn, and that's not so much the case in this one. I think they probably could have expanded the cities and put in a load of extra features, but it probably would have been more work than it was worth to bring it home with the cost of the licenses and stuff. So, yeah, it's an odd one, but one I think you can kind of understand why it didn't come home. It would have been nice to play it in the home, but yeah, I did enjoy it when I played it, but I don't know how much of that, if when I played it in the arcade, that is, I don't know how much of that was actually sitting on a great big bike and pretending that I could actually ride a Harley. That's that might have been part of the appeal. That's probably what they were going for, to be honest.
Absolutely, yeah, of course.
Let's go back to the super scalers for the last two then. First one, Stadium Cross, was one that I did not know about until I was doing the research for this one.
Same, absolutely same. Yeah. So.
And pleasantly surprised this one. I felt like this one was kind of a sequel to Enduro Racer, but it was more. And it's like, right, obviously you had the 32X Motocross and Jeremy McGrath both try and do this, but it's funny that this game that came out all the way back in 1992 with 2D visuals actually just did it and completely nailed it. I think it was
absolutely, yeah.
Superb fun. Really, really enjoyed my time with it. Thought it was a fantastic game, and it sounds like you enjoyed it just as much.
Yeah. Just to go back to what I was saying earlier about how all these motocross games in this period were absolutely terrible. Up until like this week, I'd never heard of this game. So this one kind of bucks the trend almost entirely, because it looks good, it plays well, it's fun. There's an interesting mechanic where you have to again pull back on the thing like with Enduro Racer. It's just everything that the other games that we mentioned did wrong, this one does right. You've got the big chunky sprites, You've got the commentator, talking over the tannoy in the stadium, which is really quite novel, I think, quite interesting. And yeah, it's just satisfying, especially when you get to like drift around corners with the mud splattering up and everything like that. It does when you get it right, when you get it just right, it just feels really good to like drift those bikes around. Um, yeah, it essentially repeating myself now, but it does everything right that like Motocross Championship and Jeremy McGrath did completely wrong. So it
Yeah.
can be done. It shows that it can be done with these styles of games.
Yeah, I mean, it's a game that, in theory, could have been ported in some sort of way into the 32X because it is that sort of sprite scaling that we saw with other games on the 32X that ported. And it's another one. It was a shame that it didn't come to the Saturn, but yeah, it's just the frame. Obviously, it's an arcade game, so you wouldn't see it, expect it anywhere. But the frame rate never dips. There's no ridiculous rubber banding like you see in Supercross in the 32X game. It's just really enjoyable, and yeah, it's because of lifting your handlebars up on jumps, etc., which is why I kind of thought it was kind of a successor to Enduro Racer. But yeah, I'm really glad I found this one. I'm definitely going to be going back to it because I really enjoyed my time with it, and I don't think there's too many other good motocross games from that area. I've been going through this one. It definitely isn't any Sega related ones that seem to the ones that were made for Sega hardware are just pale in comparison to this. And it was a breath of fresh air to playing it after those two games.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I must admit, though, the way I initially discovered this game was again, I know I've mentioned it about 20 times on this podcast, but the Road Rash video, John mentions this game in that video. So I was like, oh, what's that? I've never heard of that before. So I came to like the document to, our Google Doc to try and to add it in, and you'd already added it. I was like, yes, I knew Dan would be there. I knew he'd know what that was. But yeah, I'd never heard of it. So it was a very nice surprise to get it up on MAME, play it, and be pleasantly surprised by just how much fun it was. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to check it out in John's video. I'm sure I've seen that Road Rash one. It might have been that I was just trying to watch it while doing something else. So obviously, I need to watch it again because I can't remember it being mentioned in there. But yeah, I'm gonna have to see what his thoughts are
It's
on
only
there
like a
now.
very short clip. It's about 10 seconds of footage when he mentions that other games that tried
All
to do
right,
what Road Rash did. But yeah,
I'll have to check it out. And the last one, and yeah, save this one to last because I think this one was new to you, but it's one that I've played a fair bit since I got MAME. And yeah, this is racing. I think it's known as Sega Racing Hero, but the game is just called Racing Hero. But this game, oh, I can't. Let's hear
yeah.
what you thought about it because you this was brand new to
Oh,
you, wasn't
mate, I was blown away by how good this game is. I'd never heard of it before you mentioned it the other day. I think both yourself and John mentioned it. James mentioned it. And I just went and downloaded MAME and got it all working. And I was like, right, I need to get the Sega Hero thing. I've never heard of it. Put it in, loaded it up. And my God, it's just, it's the coolest thing I've ever played, in
it?
terms of these types of games. It's basically Outrun, but with motorbikes.
Yeah.
And how did I get this far in life without ever hearing about this game? It's so like it's just a mystery. So I'm getting ahead of myself here, but basically for people who haven't played it, first of all, go and play it because it's just get MAME and play it. But secondly, it's as I say, it's Outrun on a motorbike, but the angle is like kind of from behind the rider, but slightly above, so you can't really see the tires. So it's almost like you're directly behind the back of the rider, and the races are kind of split into two sections. Aren't they? The first section of the race is like on open highways with like traffic and stuff that you have to avoid on other races. But then as you go through sort of the mid-level sort of checkpoint, it changes into like a circuit race where you're just racing against other bikes. And I suppose what it is I'm a big, like I said before when we were talking about GP Rider, I'm a big sucker for this visual style, this like big chunky sprites, 90s Sega arcade races, and this just nails it down to a T. So I guess I should say thank you to yourself and to James for making me aware of this game because I'd never heard of it, and it's just taken over my life in the last week. It's brilliant. I've not completed it yet. I've got to like stage like 9 or something before the timer ran out, but Yeah, like Outrun, you choose a different path, don't you, at the end of every
Yeah.
goal, and then you can go through different countries to like, and it shows you at the end where you went on your bike. So I suppose it is really kind of a spiritual success to Outrun, but just on two wheels. But that's enough from me. Sorry, I've hogged the limelight.
Oh, I loved
Dan,
everything that you said.
just yeah, speak to me about Sega Racing Hero.
For me, this feels like the culmination of Sega sprite scales. For me, I think it's got a bit of everything. So the two-phased kind of approach that you have in each level kind of reminds me of Hang On, especially Super Hang On, where you've got the fact that it tells you where you are in certain courses, and especially in the career mode, which is at the start at least, you've got the two halves of the course. But obviously you've
Yeah.
got the two phases here. You've got the wide open road, which starts off like you say, like Outrun. And then as you go in past that first checkpoint and you get into kind of where all there's a lot of like more typical racing scenery, which looks a bit more like something that you see in GP Rider. But it's just a melding of all these different ideas that they've had throughout all of the superscalar racing games, which I mean, if the game's called Sega Racing Hero, it just feels like they just put, right, how can we make the ultimate Sega motorcycle game? Right, well, it's got to have you starting off and racing trucks and cars like in Outrun, and then you've got to and then you've got to go through a proper track like in GP Rider, and then you've got to have courses like in Hang On, and then you've got to have a really banging soundtrack, and then you can choose your where you're going next, which it's not quite like Outrun in because Outrun obviously you choose your course by driving in in the lane, but it's more like Gale Racer or Rad and Bill, where you choose your course that way, or your
Yeah.
direction that way. So it gives you an option, which where do you want to go? And obviously I don't know what roads they're going on, mate, because you start off in Australia, don't you? And it's like, well, where do you want to go? Do you want to go? Do you want to go to? Do you want to go to France or do you want to go to Japan? It's like,
I love the way they've taken like almost like stereotypical like cultural icons from different countries and just like plonked them in the most random places, like the Statue of Liberty's in the middle of the desert. It's like what?
yeah,
Why is
yeah, yeah. No water to be seen, no ocean to be seen, no
no?
skyscrapers from New York. It's just desert everywhere. And I think it's similar when you're going through in France. Not quite as. I think it's the France course where you're going through, and I think you're going through kind of like more of like a seaside sort of town, and there's like shacks that you'd see, like cabins that you'd think you'd see like in Tahiti or something on route as you go into it's like there's so many weird visual elements in there. And in some ways it feels like a mishmash, like you've got all these different like visual cues, like the icons that are meant to say, all right, here you are, this is the Statue of Liberty, we'll plonk that over there, we'll plonk the Eiffel Tower over there, we'll plonk some huts over here, and then you've got the anime girl that pops up putting her fingers up to count you down to three, two,
Yeah,
one, go, which
yeah.
it's such a mix of stuff, and the soundtrack to it is just absolutely phenomenal. And I was actually listening to it when I was cycling home from the office today. It's just, yeah, this game just hits it. For me, it does everything that a racing game should. It's fun, it's exciting, and what I do like about this one compared to a lot of other arcade races is that when you continue, you can actually continue from the stage you got to, rather than it just
Yeah,
kicking
you're
you
right. Yeah,
all the way back to the start. It's you can start, and obviously you have to do the two sections. You can't restart from, or do you? I'm trying to remember now. I think it starts you a little
yeah.
way
I think
back, doesn't it?
you start
A little way.
from the start of the course you're on. Yeah, you
Yeah,
don't start at the checkpoint. No.
yeah,
Um, Yeah,
but yeah,
there's
it's
there's loads
just
of little incidental details that I find really really nice touches, like the way that when you start off the bike wheelies, but because the camera's fixed, it kind of points up at the sky
yes,
with the bike. You're like
yes,
sort of like that, little things like that, and the animation when you come off the bike and the bike explodes, and then you've got that sort of them like sort of scaled tires that fly towards the
yes,
screen, like. It's almost like a little explosion, like in like Outrun in Hang On. It's like
yeah,
let's take advantage of the sprite scaling. Let's have the
yeah.
tires come towards the screen, that kind of thing. It's brilliant. I love little touches like that. And in the sort of in the first section of a course where you're racing in amongst the traffic, there are sections where it almost becomes like almost like a bit of a puzzle game where you'll get like three trucks and you've got to like get in the gap between the three trucks. And then as you get past them, there's like three on this side. So you then got to move over to that side. And it becomes like a game of like almost like logic, like what was that game show where was it called like The Wall or something where the wall came along and they had to get into a certain shape?
Yeah,
It's kind of like that, but with trucks and cars and things. And if you see a gap, you can actually get through it. It's not like the collision detection is actually like really refined. So if you think you can get through the gap, you actually can. It doesn't just automatically default that you've crashed. You can actually get through. So I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean we could wax lyrical about this game like for hours, couldn't we? But the long and short of it is it's just phenomenal, and how I never knew about it prior to this week is just a crime. I've committed a crime.
I think in WhatsApp I said, didn't I? I said we'll go through all the other games and then we'll talk about Sega Racing Hero for 45 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's so good.
It is. Oh, that's all of them, mate. And I think we're well over the 2 hour mark now. But
Wow. It doesn't feel like 2 hours, does it?
It doesn't. It's flown by. But loved every minute of this. But obviously, this is meant to be the best racing games, or best motorbike games on Sega. And I thought we'll round off by saying what we thought were the best ones and giving our top fives. I will give my top five first, but you, as both the guest and the motorcycle expert, will come in like, you get the second announcement. You come in as like the heavyweight champion or whatever. So I'll go first, and then you can tell us what your view is. So number 5, I had Enduro Racer, but the Master System version. Number 4, Manx TT Superbike. Number 3, I had Road Rash 2. I was going to put one Road Rash in. It was either that or the Saturn version, but I went for the second one, probably more for nostalgia. Number 2, Super Hang-On. And number 1, Hang On GP. No, Sega Racing Hero.
Wow, that's a great choice. I didn't actually pre-write my top 5 down, so I'm going to have to just sort of wing it. But so I'm going to go with at number 5. I'm probably going to go with. Oh, I'm going to go with Manx TT at number 5. Excellent. And then I'm going to go for number 4. I'm going to go for Road Rash 2. Number 3, I'm going to go for GP Rider at number 3.
Yeah.
And then at number 2, I'm going to go for the 32-bit version of Road Rash. Can I have 2 versions of Road Rash? Is that okay?
You can. Yeah, there's no rules against having one per franchise. So you're good.
I'm really sorry that I've not included Super Hang-On in this top 5. It's probably sacrilege. But my number 1 has got to be Sega Racing Hero, because it's just chef's kiss. It's just phenomenal.
It really is. Like you say, mate, we could talk about that game all day, but I think when you talk about the best game, it's a shame because when I was looking for images of it, the flyers and everything are all quite generic. You've got the 3 bikes, and there's no the visual of it is not really distinctive when you compare that to what the actual game is like. And I think that's kind of it's a shame really that it's not that well known. Sega didn't promote it as much. It never got a home port, but it really is just. I think it is just Sega at their absolute best, and what a game that is. But mate, thank you for coming on today, for spending your time, and this I've absolutely loved this. Talk about the good and the bad, and talking about the bad has been just as much fun as talking about the good.
Absolutely.
It's pretty fun. So thank you very much for coming on, Tom. So obviously, regular listeners and viewers should know where to find you and your work, but if you just want to remind our audience where they can find everything that you do.
Well, I mainly do videos about motorcycle stuff these days, weirdly, funnily enough, on YouTube. And my channel is just my name, which is Tom Charnock, or Thomas Charnock, I can't remember. That shows how much of a effort I put into my channel, doesn't it? I haven't uploaded anything for about 2 or 3 months because I've had like real life stuff to deal with, but I'll be back on it soon enough. Funnily enough, my last video that I did was about Manx TT and talking to David Todd, the guy from the real world Isle of Man TT, about that game because he'd never heard of it. And my previous work is available to read on the Dreamcast Junkyard. I've taken a bit of a back seat from that now and passed the baton over to the rest of the team. But if you want to read any of my random blurb from the last last 15 years about all manner of Dreamcast nonsense. It's the Dreamcast Junkyard.co.uk. And yeah, just to reiterate what you've said there, Dan, it's been a great honour to be on the show. And yeah, I know I could never fill the Sega-holics again. Impressive boots, but hope I've done a good job standing in while he's got important things to deal with.
Yeah, no, it's been an absolute blast, mate. These 2 hours have absolutely flown by. So really appreciate you coming on and just giving us just having a really good chat, really. And obviously you'll be back on in the future. Absolutely no doubt about that. So thank you very much. And of course, yeah, for anyone that wants to find Tom's work, you can look for his name and find his motorcycle videos, and also check out the Dreamcast Junkyard, which again, that's where I got the info, where I was obviously talking about your article on there with Suzuki House there and Redline Racing. Just one of many fantastic articles on that site, and the team are currently still keeping it going. There's still new articles, new podcasts, so make sure you check that out. So brilliant stuff. Viewers, listeners, thank you very much for tuning into this one. Really appreciate you being with us today. If you want to get involved in the discussion, you can join our Discord, or if you're in YouTube, please get in touch via the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on what are the best games that are on Sega consoles or that are made by Sega that have two wheels. Give us your thoughts. If you've enjoyed the video, please give us a like or a subscribe, so that really helps the channel, and hit that bell for notifications to stay on top of all new Sega Guys content. And if you want to be extra mega, you can become a member, which starts from as little as 99p. And this week our members are Resident SD, PWAL, Tom Fun, Piotr 007, Even Flow Gaming, Saint RG, Sharkers Retro Bites, Stubbs Gaming, Joey Pajamas, Andy Mackey, and a brand new premium subscriber this week, Nick Tullock. So thank you everyone for supporting the show. Thank you everyone for viewing, watching, whatever time of day it is. Hope you've enjoyed this one, and until next time, we'll see you on the Sega side.